My name is Sydney Castillo. The Tuesday my neurologist called me in to discuss my blood work, my husband of 5 years met me in the clinic parking lot. He did not offer a hug. He did not ask what the doctor had found. Instead, he slid a thick manila envelope across the leather console of his luxury SUV and told me he was filing for divorce. He looked at me with practiced pity and said he was building a legacy, a tech empire, and he simply could not be tied down by a sick woman. What happened next wiped the smug, calculated frown right off his face and cost him a $40 million acquisition. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled his entire life in a single afternoon, welcome to Emily Told Stories. Please take a moment to subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this kind of justice. I would also love to know how old you are and where you are watching from today, so let me know in the comments. The Houston sun was doing what it did best that afternoon. It melted the asphalt and punished anyone foolish enough to step outside the air conditioning. I walked out of the clinic's sliding glass doors with my prescribed paperwork folded neatly in my purse. I scanned the rows of shimmering metal until I spotted Bradley. His midnight blue Range Rover sat idling in the fire lane. It was a glaring testament to his belief that rules were meant for other people. I climbed into the passenger seat. The interior felt like a meat locker, chilled to 62 degrees and smelling faintly of imported leather and expensive cologne. I waited for the inevitable question. I waited for him to ask if I was okay or what the tests had revealed. He kept his eyes fixed on the stucco facade of the building. His knuckles were pale where they gripped the steering wheel at 10 and 2. The silence stretched thin and brittle, filled only by the low hum of the engine. Then, without a single word of preamble, he reached into the center console. He picked up the envelope and pushed it toward me. The stiff paper scratched against the upholstery. "I am sorry, Sydney," he said. His tone belonged in a boardroom delivering a quarterly earnings miss. There was no tremor, no hesitation. "I have a company to run. I am on the verge of something huge. I need a partner who can keep up, not someone who requires constant medical care. I hope you understand." I looked down at the envelope. The words, "Petition for dissolution of marriage," peeked through the unsealed flap. A sharp, cynical hum started in the back of my mind. Most wives, given this exact script, would shatter. They would weep, clutch at the tailored lapels of his $3,000 suit and beg for an explanation. They would promise to fight the illness, to be less of a burden, to do whatever it took to save the life they had built together. I did not do any of that. Instead, I studied him. I noted the crisp line of his jaw, the meticulous swoop of his gelled hair, and the sympathetic frown that did not quite reach his pale blue eyes. He was playing a role. He was discarding what he viewed as defective machinery before it could slow his ascent to the top of the corporate ladder. For 5 years, I had paid the mortgage on our Austin home. I had kept the lights on, bought the groceries, and maintained my own demanding career as a logistics director, while he hustled to get his tech startup off the ground. I had been the silent, steady foundation he stood on. Now that a $40 million buyout was sitting on his horizon, he was cutting the safety net he no longer needed. I kept my hands resting gently in my lap. I did not tell him that my appointment was not a death sentence. The fatigue and muscle aches I had been experiencing were not the early stages of multiple sclerosis he had assumed them to be. The doctor had handed me a diagnosis for a rare but highly manageable genetic blood marker. I required nothing more than a specialized daily supplement and occasional monitoring. More crucially, I did not tell him how I had spent the 4 hours prior to this clinic visit. While Bradley was busy finalizing the legal formatting of his exit strategy, I had been sitting in the mahogany-paneled office of Mitchell Vargas, a ruthless corporate litigator downtown. Bradley thought he was cleanly cutting ties to protect his impending tech fortune. He had no idea the financial bedrock beneath his feet was already rigged to detonate. I watched him tap his thumb against the steering wheel. He was eager to leave. He was eager to return to Lauren, his lead marketing director. I knew all about Lauren. I knew about the weekend trips to Cabo logged on our joint credit card as investor summits. I also knew about the sonogram picture sitting in a hidden folder on a shared cloud drive he had forgotten I could access. The caption she wrote under that picture called the baby, "Their little heir." Bradley wanted a legacy so badly, he was willing to abandon his wife in a hospital parking lot to get it. But as I reached out to take the envelope, my fingers brushing the coarse paper, I held on to the most beautiful secret of all. During my appointment, I had asked my neurologist to review a historical file from a fertility clinic we had visited years ago. Bradley had always refused to read those results, assuming our inability to conceive was entirely my fault. The doctor had confirmed what Bradley was too arrogant to discover for himself. He had a severe microdeletion on his Y chromosome. He was irreversibly sterile and had been since birth. The child his mistress was currently carrying, the supposed heir to his precious legacy, was a biological impossibility. I tucked the petition into my designer tote. I nodded once with eerie calm and pulled the door handle. The stifling Texas heat rushed back in, swallowing the chill of his pristine SUV. "Are you going to sign them?" he stammered. The visible confusion registering on his face was spectacular. He had prepared for a storm and was met with a vacuum. His ego could not compute why I was not fighting for him. "I accept this," I replied smoothly. "Good luck with your future, Bradley. You should probably hurry. Do you not have a big acquisition meeting today?" I walked away without looking back. I knew that exactly 10 minutes prior, Mitchell Vargas had transmitted an emergency federal injunction to the buyers of his company. Bradley drove off to sign his $40 million buyout, unaware that he was driving straight into a brick wall. To understand how I arrived at that parking lot devoid of tears, we have to rewind exactly 11 days. It was a Thursday evening. The unforgiving Texas heat had finally relented, leaving behind a sticky, lingering humidity that settled over our Austin neighborhood. I had just walked through the front door after a brutal 12-hour shift. As a supply chain logistics director for one of the largest energy conglomerates in the state, my daily existence revolves around identifying microscopic anomalies within sprawling systems. If a single pipeline valve is miscoded in West Texas, or a shipping crate goes dark somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico, it is my job to track it down. I hunt discrepancies for a living. I read complex financial spreadsheets the way other people read fiction. My brain is wired to spot the one puzzle piece that refuses to fit. That evening, the mail sat in a careless pile on the granite kitchen island. Bradley usually emptied the mailbox, but he was attending a networking dinner downtown. I tossed my keys on the counter and sifted through the glossy catalogs, the credit card offers, and the utility bills. My hands stopped when I reached a thick, official-looking envelope. The return address bore the seal of the State Tax Franchise Board. It was addressed to the headquarters of Bradley's tech startup, but right beneath his familiar company logo sat a secondary line indicating a holding company. Apex Innovations Group. I stared at those 3 words. My professional instincts flared to life, sending a sharp prickle of warning down my spine. I had never heard of Apex Innovations Group. For 5 years, Bradley and I had operated on a very clear, unspoken division of labor. I provided the stable foundation. I woke up at dawn, put on a tailored blazer, and commuted to a corporate high-rise to pay our mortgage, fund our retirement, and keep the lights on. He was the visionary. He stayed up late writing code, pitching angel investors, and building his dream. He always handled the startup finances himself. He insisted he wanted to shield me from the chaotic roller coaster stress of venture capital funding. I trusted him. I let him manage that side of our life because a marriage is supposed to be a partnership of equals. I provided the safety net so he could walk the tightrope. That single envelope proved he had built a separate safety net, one that did not include me. A few hours later, Bradley came home smelling of expensive bourbon and fell asleep the moment his head hit the pillow. I did not join him in the bedroom. I sat at the kitchen table. The house was dead quiet. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic breathing coming from down the hall. I opened my laptop. The blue light washed over the dark kitchen. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. A small, rational part of my brain urged me to put the envelope back on the pile. It whispered that this was just a routine bureaucratic error, a misfiled form by a careless accountant. But my logistics training screamed otherwise. Anomalies always have a source. I bypassed our personal banking portal and navigated straight to the Public Business Registry on the Secretary of State website. I typed in Apex Innovations Group. The search results loaded in a fraction of a second. The holding company had been registered 3 months prior. The registered agent was a high-end downtown corporate law firm. The sole managing member, holding 100% of the voting shares, was Bradley Lawson. My name was nowhere to be found on the formation documents. Why would my husband create a shadow entity without telling me I opened a new tab and started running advanced searches? I combed through industry press releases, tech blogs, and venture capital networking forums. It took 2 hours of relentless digging, cross-referencing domain registrations, and following digital breadcrumbs before I found the leak. It was a premature congratulatory post on an obscure investor message board, quickly deleted, but preserved in an internet archive. Bradley's startup was not just surviving. It was being acquired. A massive Silicon Valley conglomerate was buying his technology outright. The closing date was set for 2 weeks from that exact night. The acquisition price listed in the leaked term sheet made my breath catch in my throat. $40 million. I sat frozen in the glow of the screen. $40 million. We were about to be wealthy beyond normal comprehension. We could pay off the house tomorrow. We could afford the best fertility treatments in the country to start the family we had spent years agonizing over. I felt a brief, blinding surge of joy, but it lasted less than a heartbeat. It was immediately swallowed by a plunging, icy dread. If we were about to become multimillionaires, why was the holding company structured to bypass Texas community property laws? Why was my name actively scrubbed from the new legal entity meant to catch that windfall? I opened a third tab and logged into our joint banking portal. I navigated to the high-yield savings account where we kept our emergency fund, the money I had painstakingly saved from my corporate bonuses. The balance read $412. Just a week ago, that account held $40,000. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled up the transaction history. The money had not been stolen by a nameless hacker. It had been systematically wire transferred in increments just under the federal reporting threshold over the last 48 hours. I traced the routing numbers. The destination account was a private trust linked directly to Apex Innovations Group. The puzzle pieces snapped together with horrifying clarity. Bradley was not preparing for our shared future. He was quietly packing his bags. He was draining our marital assets, sheltering his impending fortune behind a freshly minted corporate shield, and orchestrating a quiet exit. He planned to divorce me right before the acquisition finalized, leaving me holding the bag for 5 years of mortgage debt, while he walked away with an empire I had bankrolled. A profound stillness settled over me. I sat in the dark kitchen while the man I loved slept peacefully down the hall. I did not wake him up. I did not storm into the master bedroom, turn on the harsh overhead lights, and demand an explanation. In my line of work, when you discover a systemic failure, you do not alert the faulty component. You gather the data, you build the file, you prepare the countermeasure. The illusion of my supportive, loving marriage evaporated into the humid night air. It was replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. Bradley thought he was the smartest person in the room. He thought I was just a reliable workhorse who would blindly sign whatever legal document he put in front of me when the time came. He underestimated the woman he married. I closed my laptop, plunging the kitchen back into darkness. I walked down the hall, climbed into bed, and lay inches away from a stranger. I knew I had to act fast to protect myself, but I needed more evidence of his true intentions. I needed to understand exactly how deep the betrayal ran. I did not realize the very next piece of evidence would literally walk right through my front door 2 days later, carrying a covered dish and a weaponized smile. The 48 hours following my discovery in the dark kitchen were a masterclass in psychological endurance. I woke up each morning, brewed dark roast coffee, and handed a ceramic mug to the man actively plotting my financial ruin. I tied my silk scarves, buttoned my blazers, and went to work, projecting the image of a focused corporate director. I returned home and cooked dinner, engaging in polite conversation about his day, while my mind categorized the theft of our marital assets. Bradley suspected nothing. He mistook my quiet demeanor for the physical fatigue I had been complaining about recently. He thought I was getting weaker. He did not realize I was simply conserving my energy for the war he had unknowingly started. That Saturday afternoon, the illusion of a secluded two-person conflict shattered. The doorbell rang just past 1 o'clock. I looked through the peephole and saw Patricia, my mother-in-law. She stood on our shaded porch, armored in a pastel linen blouse, oversized sunglasses, and her signature string of pearls. Patricia possessed a very specific brand of Texas high society charm. She wielded her southern hospitality like a concealed blade, masking deep calculations behind offers of sweet tea and forced radiant smiles. She was the kind of woman who would compliment your landscaping while silently judging the quality of your soil. I unlocked the heavy oak door. Patricia swept into the foyer carrying a large glass casserole dish wrapped in a checkered towel. "Oh, Sydney, you look entirely washed out," she declared, pressing a cool, dry cheek against mine. Her perfume, a sharp floral scent, filled the entryway. "Bradley mentioned you were still feeling under the weather. I brought all the ingredients for my roasted chicken soup. You need nourishment, sweetheart." I stared at her. Bradley and I rarely had visitors on weekends, and Patricia lived 40 miles away in a gated community in the suburbs. A spontaneous visit to cook me soup was a severe deviation from her usual pattern of structured, formal invitations. My logistics training immediately flagged her presence as an anomaly. "That is very kind of you, Patricia," I said, keeping my voice soft and airy, playing directly into the role of the frail, ailing wife she expected to find. She ushered me toward the living room with frantic, motherly gestures. "You march right over to that sofa and put your feet up. I will not hear a word of protest." "I know my way around your kitchen. I will handle everything. Just close your eyes and rest." I sat on the edge of the velvet sofa, pulling a woven throw blanket over my knees. Patricia bustled into the kitchen. I heard the rhythmic thud of a heavy knife hitting a cutting board and the rush of water from the sink. I picked up a magazine, pretending to read, but my senses were dialed to maximum alert. The layout of our Austin home featured a long central hallway connecting the kitchen to the master suite and the guest bedrooms. One of those spare rooms functioned as my dedicated home office. Positioned perfectly at the end of that corridor hung a large vintage mirror. If you sat on the far right cushion of the living room sofa, The angle provided a clear, unobstructed reflection of the office doorway. 10 minutes into her culinary performance, the sounds from the kitchen abruptly ceased. The running water stopped. The chopping halted. The house grew incredibly quiet, save for the hum of the central air conditioning unit. I lowered the magazine. I did not move my head, shifting only my eyes toward the vintage mirror in the hall. The reflection showed Patricia creeping out of the kitchen. She had removed her low-heeled shoes. She moved with a practiced, silent urgency down the hardwood floor, entirely bypassing the master bedroom and heading straight for my office. I watched her pause at the threshold, glance over her shoulder toward the living room, and slip inside. My pulse thrummed against my ribs. I threw off the blanket, my bare feet sinking into the plush area rug. I moved toward the hallway, matching her silent steps, pressing my back against the cool plaster of the corridor wall. I inched closer to the open office door, holding my breath, listening to the distinct metallic scrape of a drawer sliding open. I peered around the doorframe. Patricia was not admiring the artwork or looking for a rogue piece of mail. She was kneeling in front of my heavy steel filing cabinet. It was the cabinet where I kept our most sensitive household records documents Bradley always claimed he was too busy to organize. She bypassed the upper drawers containing old tax returns and utility receipts. Her manicured fingers flipped rapidly through the bottom drawer, the section reserved for permanent vital records. I watched her pull out a thick green hanging folder. She opened it on the carpet. Inside were the policy documents for my employer, provided life insurance which carried a substantial death benefit. Beneath those lay a heavy, notarized stack of parchment. It was the original deed to the Castillo Ranch. That ranch was a sprawling 500-acre property in the hill country. My grandfather had purchased it decades ago, working the arid soil with blistered hands to build a sanctuary for our family. It was a generational asset, transferred to my name shortly before my wedding. It was my bloodline, my heritage, and it held immense financial equity. Patricia traced her finger over the property lines on the survey map. Her eyes darted rapidly across the life insurance declaration page, absorbing the payout numbers. The puzzle expanded, growing darker and infinitely more malicious. The conspiracy was not just a rogue husband trying to hide his tech fortune. It was a coordinated family heist. Patricia knew about the $40 million acquisition. She also knew about my unexplained fatigue. The Lawsons were not just planning to leave me destitute. They were actively assessing my net worth, calculating whether it was more profitable for Bradley to divorce me now or wait and see if my mysterious illness proved fatal, allowing him to collect the insurance payout and inherit the ranch outright as my surviving spouse. A cold fury ignited in my chest, burning away any residual warmth I had ever felt for the woman kneeling on my floor. I stepped fully into the doorway, letting the floorboards creak beneath my weight. "Did you need help finding the garlic powder, Patricia?" I asked. She gasped, her shoulders jerking upward in a violent spasm of surprise. She scrambled to her feet, clutching the green folder against her pastel blouse like a shield. Her face drained of all color, the weaponized smile slipping away to reveal the terrified, calculating predator underneath. "Sydney," she breathed out, her chest heaving. "I thought you were asleep." "Clearly," I replied, keeping my tone mild, almost pleasant. "What do you have there?" Her eyes darted frantically around the room, searching for an exit, searching for an excuse. "Just looking for a recipe card, sweetheart," she lied smoothly. Her voice held its usual syrupy cadence, but her hands betrayed her. The heavy parchment of the ranch deed shook in her grip, trembling for a fraction of a second. "Bradley told me you kept some old family recipes in the office. I wanted to see if I could find your grandmother's biscuit instructions to go with the soup." I walked slowly across the room. I extended my hand, my palm facing upward. A recipe card in a locked, fireproof cabinet designated for financial documents, I stated. How incredibly resourceful of you. Patricia swallowed hard. The silence stretched between us thick and toxic. She realized the absurdity of her lie, but she was trapped. She slowly lowered the folder and placed it into my waiting hand. I am just so worried about you, she whispered, attempting to pivot back to maternal concern. You are so sick, Sydney. We all just want to make sure your affairs are in order. You know, to alleviate your stress. My affairs are in pristine order, I said, maintaining unrelenting eye contact. I closed the filing cabinet with my hip, the metal drawer slamming shut with a resounding crack that made her flinch. The soup smells wonderful, by the way. You should probably go tend to the stove before it boils over. Patricia practically sprinted out of the office. She packed her belongings, abandoned the half-chopped vegetables on the counter, and made a hasty retreat out the front door, muttering an excuse about a forgotten engagement. I stood alone in the hallway, gripping the folder containing my life insurance and my grandfather's legacy. The lines of battle were officially drawn. The Lawson family viewed me as a dying asset to be liquidated, but Patricia's kitchen raid had just handed me a critical advantage. If the mother was bold enough to snoop through physical cabinets for paper documents, the son was undoubtedly hiding the real, damning evidence of his betrayal somewhere else. Bradley was a creature of the tech world. He did not use filing cabinets. He lived on servers. I looked down at my phone. I knew exactly where I needed to hunt next. I needed to breach his digital footprint. I needed to see what else he was hiding in the cloud, because I had a sinking suspicion the financial theft was only the beginning of his treachery. The 48 hours following my discovery in the dark kitchen were a masterclass in psychological endurance. Once you unearth a single deception, the remaining falsehoods inevitably breach the surface. Patricia fleeing my house left a lingering scent of floral perfume and desperation in the hallway. Her clumsy attempt to secure physical documents confirmed a vital truth. The Lawson family operated on greed, but they were careless. Bradley, however, was a creature of the digital age. He guarded his smartphone with biometric locks and changing passcodes. Confronting him, or trying to guess his current security measures, would only alert him to my awareness. I needed a back door. That evening, Bradley claimed he had a late strategy session with his development team. He kissed my forehead, told me to rest my weary body, and walked out the door wearing a freshly pressed linen shirt. I waited until his taillights faded down the street. I went straight to my home office and booted up my personal desktop. Years ago, during our first anniversary trip to Aspen, we established a shared cloud storage account to organize our travel photos. It was a mundane administrative task we completed sitting in a ski lodge. Over time, I forgot the account existed. I relied on my own devices for storage. Bradley, constantly juggling startup servers and temporary files, must have repurposed that old digital real estate, assuming I would never remember the login credentials. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard. I entered my old email address and the rudimentary password we created together on that snowy afternoon. The screen refreshed, displaying a pristine grid of digital folders. I bypassed the archival albums containing pictures of snowboards and mountain peaks. My eyes scanned the modified dates. One directory stood out, updated mere hours ago. The label read, Q3, Projections. It was a terribly uninspired name, the kind of boring corporate camouflage designed to make a spouse scroll right past it. I clicked the icon. The folder did not contain spreadsheets, pie charts, or revenue forecasts. It held hundreds of high-resolution photographs. The initial images hit me like a physical blow to the sternum. Staring back at me from the glowing monitor was Lauren, the lead marketing director for Bradley's company. I knew Lauren. She was a fixture at his holiday parties and launch events. She possessed an effortless, practiced charm, always laughing a fraction too loudly at his jokes, always standing a few inches too close during group pictures. Bradley used to dismiss my subtle observations, calling her a dedicated employee who lacked boundaries but drove excellent sales numbers. The gallery laid bare the true nature of her dedication. I scrolled through the visual timeline of a parallel life. There were selfies taken on pristine white beaches, their faces pressed close together, skin bronzed by the sun. I cross-referenced the date stamps with my own mental calendar. Those sunny escapes aligned perfectly with the weekend excursions Bradley charged to our joint credit card. He told me those charges were essential investor summits, networking retreats, required to secure funding for his vision. I had paid the balance on that card month after month, unknowingly financing his romantic getaways to Cabo San Lucas. I watched them sip margaritas, lounge on yachts, and dine in candlelit restaurants. My chest tightened, drawing a sharp, shallow breath. The betrayal was thorough and extensive. It spanned nearly 3 years, overlapping with the hardest seasons of our marriage. Then I reached a subfolder titled Fall Deliverables. My hand hovered over the mouse. A cold intuition settled in my stomach. I clicked to open the directory. It contained only a single image. It was a black and white ultrasound scan. The blurry, unmistakable curve of a fetal profile filled the frame. Beneath the medical imaging, a caption typed by Lauren read, "Our little heir, arriving this fall." The air vanished from the room. My lungs refused to expand. I pushed my rolling chair back, the wheels scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring as a profound, guttural ache radiated through my ribs. Bradley often spoke about his legacy. He possessed an intense, almost primal fixation on his bloodline. He wanted to leave a lasting mark on the world, to build an empire that would bear his name for generations. During the early days of our marriage, we spent countless nights painting the spare bedroom, discussing names, dreaming of the family we would build. We tried for years. We navigated the sterile waiting rooms of fertility specialists, enduring endless rounds of invasive testing and hormone treatments. The physical toll on my body was agonizing, but the emotional cost was devastating. Month after month, the results returned negative. Bradley stopped accompanying me to the clinic. He buried himself in his startup, claiming he needed to focus on the company to distract himself from our shared failure. He let me carry the crushing weight of that disappointment alone. He watched me silently blame my own biology for our empty nursery. Now, looking at the sonogram glowing on my monitor, the truth crystallized. He had not buried his grief in his work. He had simply outsourced his dreams of fatherhood to a younger, more compliant subordinate. He decided I was broken machinery, incapable of producing the heir he believed he deserved. I slid off the chair and sank onto the rug. I pulled my knees to my chest and buried my face in my hands. I let the tears come. I wept for the woman who spent years apologizing for a biological shortcoming. I wept for the marriage I built on a foundation of blind trust. I mourned the life I thought I was living. The grief washed over me in crushing, relentless waves. I allowed myself to feel every ounce of the agony, understanding that the only way out of this emotional wreckage was straight through it. The antique clock in the hallway chimed midnight. Exactly 1 hour had passed since I opened the sonogram picture. The tears stopped. I wiped my damp cheeks with the back of my hand. I stood up. The woman who collapsed onto that rug was a grieving, discarded wife. The woman who rose from the floor was a forensic investigator. The sorrow evaporated, leaving behind an icy, impenetrable resolve. Bradley wanted to erase me from his narrative. He wanted to fund his new family, using the fortune he built on my financial stability. I refused to be a passive casualty in his success story. I sat back down at the desk. My eyes were dry. My hands were perfectly steady. I returned my attention to the cloud drive, no longer a victim, but a predator, mapping a digital hunting ground. If he hid his mistress in a folder meant for marketing projections, what else did he conceal in this neglected digital archive? I navigated back to the root directory. I scanned past the personal albums and opened a secondary cluster of folders labeled Initial Seed Capital. The infidelity provided the motive, but I needed the mechanism of his impending wealth. I needed to understand how a man who drained our savings managed to position himself for a $40 million buyout. I opened a document file titled Collateral Agreements. I skimmed the dense legal jargon tracing the origins of his very first business loans. My eyes landed on the signature page. A chilling realization swept through my veins, freezing the blood in my chest. The betrayal I uncovered an hour ago was merely a moral failing. The document glowing on my screen represented a serious, undeniable felony. I stared at the forged ink, realizing the war I was about to wage would not be fought in a family court, but in a federal jurisdiction. The infidelity was a deeply personal wound. It struck at the core of my identity as a woman and a wife. However, the subsequent revelation lurking inside that digital directory was an entirely different breed of devastation. Affairs destroy marriages, but financial crimes dismantle futures. My logistics training demanded a full accounting of the structural collapse. I could not stop at the marketing folder. I needed to unearth the financial bedrock of Apex Innovations Group and understand exactly how Bradley funded his ascension. I navigated away from the photographs and opened the cluster of folders labeled Initial Seed Capital. The files inside were dense, labyrinthine PDF documents. I adjusted the brightness on my monitor, my eyes scanning the thick paragraphs of legalese, loan covenants, and amortization schedules. These were the origination papers for the venture capital loans that breathed life into his tech startup 3 years ago. During that specific period, Bradley had claimed we were surviving on a shoestring budget. He had asked me to cover all the household expenses because the business was struggling to secure traditional financing. Yet the documents glowing on my screen painted a starkly contrasting picture. A major commercial bank had issued a multi-million-dollar line of credit to his fledgling company. Banks do not hand out seven-figure loans to untested startups based on a charming pitch and a slick presentation. They require ironclad collateral. They demand tangible, liquid assets to mitigate their risk. I scrolled down to the security agreement section of the primary loan contract. My index finger traced the lines of text on the monitor. The schedule of collateral did not list equipment, intellectual property, or business inventory. The designated asset was a sprawling parcel of real estate. The legal description detailed 500 acres of prime, undeveloped land situated in the heart of the Texas Hill Country. The breath caught in my throat. It was the Castillo Ranch. I clicked to the final page of the PDF, the signature block. Staring back at me, rendered in crisp, black digital ink, was my own name. The cursive loops and sharp angles of my signature were flawlessly replicated. It was a perfect forgery. I closed my eyes. The sterile glow of the home office faded, replaced by the vivid sensory memory of the hill country. I could smell the sharp, earthy scent of cedar trees and baked limestone. I saw my grandfather standing in the vast arid fields under the relentless summer sun. I remembered his hands the most. They were rough, calloused, and permanently stained with the dust of the land he fiercely protected. He had sacrificed his entire life working through droughts and economic downturns to preserve those 500 acres. That ranch was not just a piece of real estate. It was a generational sanctuary, a testament to my family's resilience and grit. My grandfather transferred the deed to my name shortly before my wedding, entrusting me to safeguard our heritage. Bradley knew the profound emotional weight that land carried. He knew I would never, under any circumstance, leverage my bloodline to fund his speculative corporate gamble. So he bypassed my consent. He stole it. The sheer audacity of the crime sent a shockwave of cold adrenaline through my nervous system. Bradley banked on the assumption that my blind trust would prevent me from ever verifying the paperwork. He assumed I was a compliant, unquestioning spouse who would never look beneath the surface of his carefully curated facade. He used my unwavering support as a smokescreen to commit a severe federal offense. In the state of Texas, community property laws provide certain protections, but forging a spouse signature to encumber a separate inherited asset elevates the dispute from a civil family matter to a criminal jurisdiction. By submitting fraudulent collateral documents across state lines to a national banking institution, Bradley had committed wire fraud and bank fraud. The penalty for these offenses was not a simple division of assets in a divorce settlement. The penalty was a lengthy sentence in a federal penitentiary. The messy, emotional betrayal of a pregnant mistress suddenly felt like a minor footnote compared to the magnitude of this legal liability. Bradley had tied my generational wealth to his precarious business venture. If his tech startup had failed, the bank would have foreclosed on the Castillo ranch. I would have lost my grandfather's legacy without ever knowing it was at risk. The tears I shed an hour earlier felt like a distant, naive memory. I transitioned into a state of hyper-focused efficiency. I reached into my desk drawer and retrieved a high-capacity encrypted USB flash drive. I plugged it into the computer tower and began the meticulous process of forensic evidence collection. I did not just drag and drop the files. I preserved the metadata. I captured the creation dates, the author properties, and the digital footprints embedded within every single document. I downloaded the forged loan agreements, the wire transfer receipts, the holding company registration forms, and the entire photo gallery containing Lauren and the sonogram. I organized the data into pristine chronological directories. I built an airtight, undeniable timeline of his treachery. Every click of the mouse felt like chambering around. I was constructing a legal guillotine documenting every lie, every stolen dollar, and every forged signature. When the transfer reached 100%, I safely ejected the flash drive. I gripped the small metallic rectangle in my palm. It weighed only a few ounces, yet it contained the power to obliterate Bradley Lawson's entire existence. A lesser woman might have marched down the hallway right then. She might have thrown open the bedroom door, hurled his tailored suits onto the front lawn, and screamed until the neighbors called the police. She might have confronted him with the printed sonogram and demanded a tearful confession. I did none of those things. Revealing my hand now would only give him time to hide his remaining assets, destroy the original files, and manipulate his investors. He needed to believe the illusion was still intact. He needed to walk into his $40 million acquisition meeting, radiating unwarranted confidence. I powered down the desktop computer, erasing my digital tracks. I pushed the chair back, turned off the desk lamp, and walked quietly out of the office. The hallway mirror reflected a woman transformed. The exhausted, trusting wife was dead. In her place stood a tactical adversary, preparing for a silent war. I slipped into the master bedroom. The room was dark and cool. Bradley lay on his side, his breathing slow and rhythmic. He looked incredibly peaceful. He looked like a man who believed he had outsmarted the world. I slid under the luxury duvet lying mere inches away from the traitor. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the subtle rustle of the sheets as he shifted in his sleep. He thought he was on the precipice of unimaginable wealth and a brand new family. He had no idea he was sleeping next to the architect of his impending ruin. I closed my eyes and allowed the steady, methodical rhythm of my own heartbeat to lull me to sleep. The trap was set. The evidence was secured. I only needed to wait for the perfect moment to spring the mechanism. When dawn broke the next morning, I expected the day to unfold with my new calculated routine. I did not anticipate that the conspiracy would extend beyond my husband and his mother. I did not realize that the next test of my composure would arrive via a frantic text message before I even finished my first cup of coffee. The screen of my phone illuminated on the granite counter, displaying a notification from Bradley's sister Natalie. She was demanding an urgent, immediate meeting at a local cafe, inadvertently presenting me with the perfect opportunity to deploy a devastating countermeasure. The sun crested the Austin skyline, casting long, sharp shadows across our bedroom floor. I lay perfectly still, listening to the rhythmic hum of the central air conditioning and the rustle of expensive fabric. Bradley was standing in front of his custom mahogany closet, selecting a tailored suit for the day. He hummed a faint, upbeat tune, the sound of a man who believed the universe was aligning entirely in his favor. I watched him knot his silk tie through half-closed eyelids, maintaining the steady, even breathing of a sleeping spouse. He grabbed his leather briefcase, kissed the crown of my head with practiced hollow affection, and walked out the door. The moment the deadbolt clicked shut, the facade of the peaceful morning shattered. My phone illuminated on the granite nightstand, vibrating against the hard surface. The screen displayed a text message from Bradley's younger sister, Natalie. The message read, "Are you awake? We need to grab coffee today. Please." I stared at the glowing pixels. The request was highly unusual. Natalie was a pediatric nurse who worked grueling shifts at a downtown hospital. Our relationship had always been warm but compartmentalized, characterized by holiday gift exchanges and occasional weekend brunches. She possessed a soft, empathetic nature, serving as a stark contrast to Patricia's cold, calculating demeanor. For years, Natalie had called me her real sister, claiming I brought much-needed sanity to the chaotic Lawson family dynamic. Yet, as I read her urgent message, my logistics training assessed the variables. Yesterday, Patricia attempted to raid my financial files. Today, Natalie demanded a spontaneous meeting. The coordination was too precise to be a coincidence. The Lawsons were mobilizing. They were probing my defenses, trying to determine exactly how much collateral damage they would need to manage when Bradley finalized his exit strategy. I typed a brief reply, agreeing to meet her at a local cafe near her hospital. I threw off the duvet, stepped into the shower, and let the scalding water wash away the residual exhaustion. I dressed with deliberate care, choosing a soft knit, oversized sweater and minimal makeup. I needed to look presentable, but I also needed to look tired. I was dressing for a role. The cafe was a bustling, high-ceilinged establishment filled with the grinding roar of espresso machines and the sharp clatter of ceramic mugs. The heavy scent of roasted beans and vanilla syrup hung in the air. I spotted Natalie immediately. She sat in a corner booth, bathed in the harsh morning light filtering through the large front windows. Her posture radiated anxiety. She hunched over a steaming latte, her shoulders drawn tight toward her ears. Her hands were busy methodically tearing a paper napkin into microscopic shreds. As I approached the table, she looked up, and I saw the deep purple shadows under her eyes. Guilt is a heavy burden, and Natalie clearly lacked the structural integrity to carry it. "Sydney," she exhaled, her voice tight and breathy. "Thank you for coming. I know you have been feeling so drained lately." I slid into the booth across from her, folding my hands neatly on the wooden tabletop. I ordered a green tea from a passing waiter and offered her a tired, grateful smile. "I have been better," I admitted softly, keeping my volume low. "It is just a lingering fatigue. The doctors are running some panels next week. Natalie flinched. The reaction was microscopic, a tiny tightening of her jaw, but I caught it. She dropped her gaze to the shredded napkin. "Listen," she started, her fingers twisting around her coffee cup. "I wanted to check on you. Bradley has been so distant lately. He is just under an enormous amount of pressure with the buyout. And other things." I maintained a steady, blank expression. "The buyout." She said the word with casual familiarity. My own husband had not uttered a single syllable to me about selling his startup, yet his sister knew the specific terminology. The revelation settled heavy in my chest. The betrayal was not isolated to a cheating spouse and a greedy mother. The entire Lawson family sat around their Sunday dinner tables laughing, sharing wine, and passing dishes, fully aware that Bradley was bleeding my bank accounts dry and orchestrating a secret life with a pregnant subordinate. They knew about Lauren. They knew about the $40 million. They were all complicit. A sharp, searing anger flared behind my ribs, urging me to flip the wooden table, to scream the truth, to watch her crumble under the weight of her own hypocrisy. But a supply chain director knows that losing emotional control is the fastest way to lose the war. Confronting Natalie would alert Bradley. It would give him the opportunity to obscure his financial tracks and secure the forged collateral documents. I needed them to remain blind, comfortable, and arrogant. I needed to deploy a countermeasure. I needed a red herring. I leaned forward across the table, allowing my shoulders to slump. I let out a long, ragged sigh, channeling every ounce of genuine exhaustion I had felt over the past 5 years of supporting her brother. "I know he is stressed, Natalie," I whispered. My voice trembled, a calculated waver designed to pierce her fragile conscience. "He is carrying so much weight on his shoulders. He works so hard for our future." I paused, pressing my lips together as if fighting back a wave of profound sorrow. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing a single hot tear to gather at the corner of my lash line and spill down my cheek. "I am just so frightened," I continued, my voice barely audible above the din of the cafe. "I feel like my body is failing me. I am so tired all the time. I just hope my mysterious health issues are not burdening him too much. He deserves a strong partner right now, especially with this big transition at work. I just feel so useless." The impact of my performance was immediate and devastating. Natalie went entirely pale. The remaining color drained from her face, leaving her skin looking like parchment. Her eyes widened, swimming with genuine, agonizing horror. She was looking at a woman she believed was sick, vulnerable, and harboring a deep, unconditional love for a man who was actively conspiring to destroy her. "Oh, Sydney," she choked out, her hand reaching across the table to grasp my fingers. Her palm was clammy and cold. "You are not a burden. Please do not ever think you are a burden. Bradley loves you. He is just overwhelmed. Everything is going to be fine." Her reassurances were hollow, desperate attempts to soothe her own complicity. She squeezed my hand, offering promises she knew were spectacular lies. I squeezed back, offering a watery, trusting smile. By feeding her this narrative, I constructed a perfect shield. I painted myself as weak, clueless, and entirely dependent on her brother's goodwill. Natalie would leave this cafe, sit in her car, and call Bradley. She would report that I suspected nothing about Lauren, nothing about the money, and nothing about the forged ranch deed. She would tell him I was merely a fragile, ailing wife, drowning in my own insecurity. I let her pay for the drinks. We walked out onto the sun-baked pavement, the Texas heat instantly wrapping around us. She hugged me tightly, whispering another round of empty comforts into my ear before hurrying toward her car, eager to escape the suffocating weight of my engineered vulnerability. I watched her drive away, the brake lights flashing as she merged into the morning traffic. The moment her car disappeared around the corner, my posture straightened. The manufactured tear dried on my cheek. The frail, stumbling wife vanished, replaced by a cold, operational strategist. I had neutralized the family scouts. Patricia thought I was disorganized. Natalie thought I was oblivious. Bradley believed I was a compliant stepping stone. I had successfully insulated my investigation, building a fortified wall around my true intentions. They were arranging a house of cards on a table they believed they controlled. I pulled my car keys from my purse. The defensive phase of my operation was officially complete. It was time to switch to a synchronized, devastating offense. A crying wife cannot stop a $40 million corporate acquisition, nor can she prevent a federal bank fraud scheme from finalizing. To execute the kind of destruction Bradley earned, I needed a weapon forged from rigid legal statutes and ruthless corporate litigation. I slid into the driver's seat and entered a new destination into the navigation system. I was not going to my corporate office. I was heading into the towering glass and steel structures of downtown Houston, straight toward a heavily tinted legal firm. I needed to meet a man who specialized in turning white-collar hubris into federal indictments. The trap was primed, and it was time to install the kill switch. The defensive perimeter was established. The Lawson family scouts were neutralized, completely convinced by my performance of a frail, unsuspecting wife. While Bradley spent his weekend test-driving luxury strollers and browsing nursery catalogs with Lauren, I navigated my sedan through the labyrinth of concrete and steel that defined the downtown Houston skyline. I parked in a subterranean garage beneath a towering skyscraper composed entirely of smoked glass. I was not there to hire a divorce attorney to mediate the division of our furniture. I was there to retain an assassin. I rode the express elevator to the 42nd floor. The brass placard beside the heavy oak double doors read, "Vargas and Sterling, Corporate Litigation." The reception area was an intimidating expanse of polished marble and cold, modernist artwork designed specifically to communicate wealth, aggression, and uncompromising power. Mitchell Vargas did not look like the lawyers in movies who pace dramatically in front of juries. He was a man in his late 50s with close-cropped silver hair and eyes that possessed the dead, unblinking focus of a shark. His reputation preceded him. Mitchell specialized in dissecting complex financial fraud, hostile takeovers, and corporate malfeasance. He was ruthless, precise, and profoundly expensive. I sat across from him in an office that offered a panoramic view of the sprawling Texas metropolis. I did not waste time with tears or emotional preamble. I reached into my purse, extracted the encrypted USB drive, and slid it across the vast expanse of his mahogany desk. I laid out the timeline with clinical detachment. I detailed the anomalous tax form, the discovery of Apex Innovations Group, and the clandestine transfer of our marital savings. I pulled up the photographs of Lauren and the sonogram on his secure conference monitor, establishing the motive. Then I displayed the collateral agreements for his initial startup loans. Mitchell Vargas leaned forward, steepling his fingers. His predatory eyes scanned the glowing PDF on the monitor, tracing the legal description of the Castillo Ranch and settling on the forged signature block. He leaned back in his leather chair, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. "He did not just cheat on you," Sidney Mitchell said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. "He committed felony wire fraud. Forging a spouse's signature to encumber a separate generational asset and transmitting those documents to a federally insured banking institution is a severe criminal offense." "I know," I replied, my voice steady. "I want to stop the acquisition. He plans to finalize the sale of his company for $40 million. He intends to use the proceeds sheltered in his Shadow LLC to fund his new life and leave me with the mortgage debt. Mitchell tapped a gold pen against his notepad. The cinematic version of this story involves us bursting into a courtroom, securing an instant emergency injunction from a sympathetic judge, and freezing his assets dramatically. The reality of federal commercial litigation is much slower and infinitely more bureaucratic. He stood up and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the crawling traffic far below. However, we do not need a judge to detonate this deal. We simply need to introduce toxicity into the ecosystem. In the corporate world, acquiring a company with tainted, fraudulent assets is radioactive. It kills the deal instantly during the final stages of due diligence. Venture capitalists are incredibly risk-averse when it comes to federal crimes. Mitchell returned to his desk and began outlining a dual-pronged, airtight strike. It was a strategy of pure, unadulterated, bureaucratic violence. First, he explained, we will file a lease pendens directly against the deed of the Castillo Ranch in the county records. This is a formal public notice of pending legal action regarding the title of the property. It immediately clouds the title, rendering the collateral securing his original startup loans highly contested and legally unstable. He wrote the term down on his notepad and underlined it twice. Second, we bypass the family courts entirely and engage in corporate warfare. I will draft a formal notice of fraudulent inducement. We will have this document prepared and ready to serve directly to the legal counsel representing the Silicon Valley conglomerate purchasing his company. I absorbed the strategy, the cold logic settling over me like armor. We were not just building a defensive wall around my grandfather's legacy. We were planting a synchronized legal landmine directly beneath Bradley's impending fortune. The moment those notices were filed, his startup would instantly transform from a highly lucrative acquisition target into an active federal crime scene. The mechanism was flawless, but the timing had to be absolutely perfect. If we filed too early, Bradley could attempt to negotiate a settlement, restructure his debt, or manipulate the buyers into a delayed closing. He needed to believe the path was clear until the very last possible second. He needed to step onto the trap door before we pulled the lever. Mitchell finished outlining the tactical deployment and looked across the desk at me. The trap is designed, Sydney. When do we send it? I looked out the window at the sprawling Texas horizon, the heat waves shimmering above the concrete jungle. I thought about the pain of the past 5 years. I thought about the countless nights I spent apologizing for my body, absorbing the blame for our empty nursery while he secretly built a parallel life. I thought about the sheer, suffocating arrogance of a man who believed he could steal my heritage to fund his betrayal and walk away without a single consequence. Next Tuesday, I replied, my voice devoid of any hesitation. The exact morning he plans to sign the final acquisition papers. Mitchell Vargas nodded, his shark-like smile returning. He closed his leather folio, signaling the end of the consultation. It will be executed precisely on schedule. I left the downtown high-rise and navigated the labyrinth of the parking garage. The defensive posturing was over. The offensive strategy was locked in place, fueled by the slow, grinding machinery of federal corporate law. Bradley was going to walk into that boardroom next week expecting champagne and a massive payout. He had no idea the pen he intended to use to sign that contract was going to become the instrument of his own total annihilation. I drove back toward my Austin neighborhood, the impending Tuesday circled in bold red ink in my mind. However, I still had one more critical appointment to attend before the trap snapped shut. The legal mechanisms were primed, but the universe had a peculiar sense of poetic justice. I was scheduled to visit my neurologist to discuss the results of my recent blood work. I anticipated a routine conversation about a manageable genetic marker. I did not anticipate that a simple request for historical records from an old fertility clinic would hand me the ultimate devastating irony. A revelation that would shatter the very foundation of the legacy Bradley was so desperate to protect. Which brings us back to that Tuesday morning. The air outside the Houston Medical Center was heavy and oppressive, a typical summer morning that felt more like walking through a damp sauna than traversing a city street. I navigated the polished linoleum corridors, moving toward the neurology department. The legal machinery I had initiated with Mitchell Vargas was currently grinding forward an invisible avalanche preparing to crush Bradley's tech empire. My focus, however, was tethered to the impending medical conversation. The fatigue and muscle aches had persisted for weeks, providing the perfect cover story for my investigations, but the physical symptoms were very real. I checked in at the reception desk and took a seat in the waiting area. I felt a subtle thrum of genuine apprehension. The anxiety was entirely detached from the impending divorce. It was rooted in the uncertainty of my physical well-being. Bradley had convinced himself I was suffering from early-onset multiple sclerosis, a devastating diagnosis he used to justify his cowardly exit. He needed me to be irreparably broken so he could construct a narrative where he was a tragic hero, forced to move on for the sake of his legacy. A nurse called my name, guiding me into a small, sterile examination room. 10 minutes later, Dr. Eris Thorne walked in. He was a distinguished specialist with a calming demeanor, carrying a manila folder that held the answers to the physical exhaustion that had plagued me. He sat on the rolling stool, opened the file, and offered a remarkably relaxed smile. The expression instantly diffused the tension coiled in my chest. Sydney. Dr. Thorne began his tone even and reassuring. I have reviewed the comprehensive blood panels and the genetic sequencing. You do not have multiple sclerosis. You do not have any degenerative neurological condition. I exhaled a long, shaky breath, feeling a profound weight lift off my shoulders. The relief was palpable, washing over me in a warm wave. What you do have, he continued, tapping the printed lab results, is a highly unusual hereditary metabolic condition. Your body struggles to synthesize a specific complex of B vitamins and essential amino acids. The deficiency causes profound fatigue, muscle weakness, and occasional cognitive fog. It is incredibly rare, which is why your primary care physician missed it, but it is entirely benign and easily treatable. He slid a prescription slip across the examination table. We will start you on a specialized high-dose daily supplement regimen. Within 3 weeks, your energy levels will return to normal. You are going to be perfectly fine. I stared at the slip of paper. My alleged terminal illness, the catalyst Bradley used to rationalize his abandonment, required nothing more than an upgraded daily vitamin. The absurdity of the situation almost made me laugh. I was not dying. I was not broken. I was merely running on a biological deficit that could be corrected with a simple pill. However, my physical health was only the first item on the agenda. I had scheduled this appointment with a secondary, deeply hidden motive. Dr. Thorne, I said, carefully folding the prescription and placing it in my purse. When I scheduled the genetic sequencing, I signed a release form authorizing your clinic to obtain my historical medical records. Did you receive the file from the Austin Fertility Institute? Dr. Thorne's relaxed demeanor shifted, replaced by a clinical, observant professionalism. He nodded, flipping to the back of the manila folder. I did receive the file. I reviewed the comprehensive workup you and your husband underwent 4 years ago. My heart began a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. During our struggle to conceive, we had both submitted to an exhaustive battery of tests. When the results were finalized, the fertility clinic called us in for a consultation. Bradley had refused to attend. He claimed he was closing a critical round of seed funding for his startup and could not spare the afternoon. He told me to go alone, assuming the problem rested entirely with my biology. I attended the appointment, received a clean bill of reproductive health, and spent the next 4 years agonizing over unexplained infertility. carrying the blame in silence. I never read his portion of the lab work, I admitted, my voice steady, despite the tension knotting my stomach. He always managed his own medical records. I need you to translate his results for me. Dr. Thorne extracted a multi-page document from the folder. The header displayed the Austin Fertility Institute logo alongside Bradley Lawson's name and birth date. The doctor scanned the technical jargon, his brow furrowing slightly before he looked back at me. "Sydney," he said, choosing his words with deliberate care. "I understand why you are asking for this clarification. According to this specialized genetic assay, your husband possesses a severe structural chromosomal abnormality. It is a complete microdeletion on the Y chromosome, specifically within the AZF region." "I am a supply chain director," I replied, maintaining eye contact. "I deal in logistics, not biology. What does that mean in practical terms?" "It means," Dr. Thorne stated, his voice devoid of any ambiguity, "that your husband produces absolutely zero viable sperm. The condition is congenital. He was born with it, and it is irreversible. Without highly invasive surgical extraction and advanced in vitro intervention, which these records indicate he never pursued, natural conception is a biological impossibility. He is, and always has been, completely sterile." The sterile clinic room vanished. The ambient noise of the hospital corridor faded into a dull roar. The universe had just handed me a revelation so profoundly ironic, so devastatingly perfect, it felt like divine intervention. I sat frozen on the examination table, processing the magnitude of the truth. Bradley had allowed me to drown in self-loathing, convinced my body was failing our marriage. He had leveraged my generational wealth, committed federal bank fraud, and drained our life savings to fund an empire for a child he believed would carry his legacy. But Lauren's little heir, the baby growing in the sonogram tucked away in that hidden cloud directory, could not possibly belong to him. The betrayal folded back on itself, creating a masterpiece of poetic justice. Lauren was not just a dedicated marketing director who overstepped professional boundaries. She was a grifter. She had recognized Bradley's desperate obsession with building a legacy and exploited it with ruthless efficiency. She was using him as a financial stepping stone, securing her own future while carrying another man's child. Bradley, the architect of my intended ruin, was the victim of a con infinitely more sophisticated than his own. I thanked Dr. Thorne, my voice echoing strangely in the quiet room. I walked out of the clinic, the humid Houston air hitting me like a physical wall. The pieces were no longer just moving into place on the chessboard. The game was over. I possessed the legal kill switch to obliterate his financial future, and I now held the biological truth that would incinerate his personal life. I navigated the sprawling hospital parking lot, spotting his midnight blue Range Rover idling in the fire lane. I approached the vehicle, my reflection distorted in the tinted glass. I was not the frail, dying wife he expected to find. I was the executioner, walking calmly toward the guillotine. I prepared to open the passenger door, ready to accept the divorce papers he had undoubtedly brought with him, knowing that the moment he handed me that envelope, he was sealing his own spectacular, multi-tiered destruction. The automatic sliding doors of the Houston Medical Center parted with a soft, mechanical sigh. I stepped out of the sterile, climate-controlled lobby and straight into a wall of suffocating Texas heat. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the vast expanse of the parking lot, causing the asphalt to shimmer and warp the horizon. I walked at a deliberate, measured pace. My designer heels clicked rhythmically against the concrete, providing a steady cadence to the symphony of destruction playing in my mind. I was no longer the exhausted, anxious wife searching for answers to a mysterious physical decline. The diagnosis of a simple vitamin deficiency had cured my anxiety, but the revelation regarding my husband's irreversible sterility had weaponized me. I carried a biological truth that rendered his entire secret life a spectacular, expensive farce. I scanned the rows of parked vehicles until I spotted the midnight blue Range Rover. It sat idling illegally in the designated fire lane, a blatant monument to his towering entitlement. The dark-tinted windows obscured the interior, but I knew exactly how he was sitting. He would be checking his Rolex, tapping his manicured fingers against the leather steering wheel, rehearsing the tragic narrative he planned to deliver. He needed to be the victim of this story. He needed a clean exit to preserve his reputation before he ascended to the ranks of the ultra-wealthy. I reached the passenger side and pulled the heavy door open. A blast of frigid 60-degree air conditioning washed over my face, carrying the familiar scent of imported leather and Tom Ford cologne. I climbed into the cabin and pulled the door shut. The thick automotive glass instantly muffled the ambient noise of the city, sealing us inside a quiet, tense vacuum. Bradley did not turn his head to look at me. His posture was rigid, his shoulders squared in his tailored Italian suit. He kept his pale blue eyes fixed on the stucco facade of the hospital entrance. The silence in the cabin stretched thin, taut as a piano wire, ready to snap. He was waiting for me to speak first. He was waiting for me to ask for comfort, to recount the doctor's visit, to offer him the opening he required to deliver his fatal blow. I said nothing. I folded my hands neatly in my lap and waited. I possessed infinite patience because I already knew the ending to the script he was trying to perform. After a full minute of suffocating silence, Bradley shifted his weight. He reached his right hand into the center console and retrieved a thick manila envelope. He did not hand it to me directly. Instead, he slid the stiff paper across the leather armrest until it touched my elbow. The dry, scratching sound of the envelope sliding across the upholstery was the only noise in the vehicle. "I am sorry, Sydney," he said. His voice was a masterclass in corporate detachment. It was the exact tone he used when terminating underperforming employees. It lacked any trace of genuine sorrow, any tremor of hesitation. "I have a company to run," he continued, his gaze still locked straight ahead. "I am on the verge of something profound. I am building a legacy. I need a partner who can keep up with the demands of my trajectory, not someone who requires constant medical supervision. This illness of yours, it is changing the dynamic of our lives. I cannot be tied down by a sick woman. I hope you can find it in your heart to understand." I looked down at the envelope. The bold black letters printed across the top sheet peeked through the unsealed flap. Petition for dissolution of marriage. A sharp, crystalline clarity settled over my mind. He was using my physical health as a shield for his infidelity and his greed. He believed he was executing a flawless, victimless crime. He assumed he could discard me in a hospital parking lot, driving away with a clean conscience and a $40 million fortune waiting for him downtown. A traditional wife. A woman blinded by love and reliance on her husband's validation would have shattered at that exact moment. She would have ripped the envelope open with trembling fingers. She would have wept openly, clutching at the fabric of his expensive suit, begging him to reconsider. She would have promised to fight the illness, to hire private nurses to be less of a burden, doing whatever it took to salvage the remnants of their shared history. I did none of those things. I did not shed a single tear. My breathing remained deep and even. I turned my head slowly and studied the man sitting in the driver's seat. I observed the crisp, arrogant line of his jaw. I noted the meticulous, practiced swoop of his gelled hair. I saw the superficial, sympathetic frown that he wore like a cheap theatrical mask. He was playing a role, discarding what he viewed as defective machinery before it could slow his ascent to the top of the corporate ladder. I let the silence stretch again, allowing the sheer weight of my lack of reaction to fill the cabin. I did not tell him that my doctor appointment was not a death sentence. I did not mention that the fatigue I had been experiencing required nothing more than a specialized daily supplement. More crucially, I did not tell him how the timeline of this morning had actually unfolded. While Bradley was busy printing these divorce papers and adjusting his silk tie in the mirror, I had been coordinating with Mitchell Vargas. Exactly 10 minutes prior to this moment, my legal counsel had transmitted the formal notices of fraudulent inducement directly to the legal team representing the Silicon Valley conglomerate purchasing his startup. The lis pendens had already been filed against the Castillo Ranch deed. Bradley thought he was cleanly cutting ties to protect his impending tech fortune. He had no idea the financial bedrock beneath his feet had just been pulverized into dust. I reached out and picked up the envelope. The paper felt heavy, loaded with the weight of 5 wasted years. I tucked the petition neatly into my designer tote bag, making sure the flap was secure. I looked him dead in the eye. "Okay," I said softly. Bradley blinked. The practiced frown vanished, replaced by a genuine, unfiltered spasm of confusion. He shifted in his seat, finally turning his head to face me fully. His eyebrows furrowed, creating deep creases in his forehead. "Okay," he repeated the word, stumbling awkwardly out of his mouth. "I accept this," I replied, my voice remaining perfectly smooth and unbothered. The visible dissonance registering on his face was spectacular to witness. Narcissists require fuel. They require a reaction to validate their own importance. He had braced himself for a hurricane of hysterics. He expected to feel powerful, standing firm against the emotional tidal wave of a discarded spouse. Meeting a total vacuum short-circuited his ego. His brain simply could not process why I was not fighting to keep him. "That is it," he stammered, his hand hovering uncertainly over the steering wheel. "You are just going to take the papers? You are not going to say anything else?" I offered him a tight, polite smile. It was the same smile I gave to unhelpful customer service representatives. "That is it," I confirmed. "We clearly want different things out of life. Good luck with your future, Bradley." I placed my hand on the chrome door handle. I paused for a fraction of a second, looking back at his bewildered, fracturing expression. "You should probably hurry," I added, my tone light and conversational. "Do you not have a big meeting downtown today? You would not want to be late for something that important." I pulled the handle and pushed the heavy door open. The stifling Texas heat rushed back into the cabin, swallowing the sterile, chilled air. I stepped out onto the blazing asphalt and closed the door with a firm, satisfying click. I did not look back. I walked away, my heels resuming their steady, rhythmic cadence against the concrete. I heard the sudden, aggressive roar of the Range Rover engine as Bradley slammed his foot on the accelerator. The tires squealed faintly against the pavement as he tore out of the fire lane, speeding toward the highway on-ramp. He was racing toward the downtown financial district, his ego bruised by my indifference, his mind focused entirely on the $40 million contract waiting for his signature. He was heading straight for a glass-walled conference room, surrounded by wealthy investors and his pregnant mistress, ready to claim his legacy. He was completely unaware that he was driving straight off a sheer cliff. The legal trap Mitchell Vargas and I had meticulously constructed was already armed, waiting in the center of that boardroom, ready to decimate every single lie he had ever told. 2 hours after Bradley drove away from the hospital, he arrived at a towering skyscraper in the heart of the Houston financial district. I was not present in the room to witness his downfall, but I did not need to be. Mitchell Vargas provided a meticulous debriefing later that afternoon, supplemented by the official transcript from the frantic conference call the buyers initiated the moment the dust settled. Through those detailed accounts, I could see the scene unfold with crystal clarity, playing out like a flawlessly directed cinematic sequence. Bradley sat at the head of a sprawling polished oak table inside a glass-walled conference room. The space belonged to the high-priced legal team representing the Silicon Valley conglomerate purchasing his startup. The room smelled of expensive catered coffee and the crisp scent of freshly printed legal bond paper. The atmosphere was charged with the electric, intoxicating thrill of impending wealth. Lauren sat to his right. She was no longer just the lead marketing director taking notes in the background. She was actively performing the role of the supportive partner, resting a manicured hand over her stomach, projecting the image of a burgeoning family. Bradley beamed at the group, absorbing the congratulatory praise from the lead venture capitalist sitting across the table. The champagne was already poured. Crystal flutes sat beside the thick stacks of acquisition contracts. Bradley was minutes away from securing a fortune. He had executed his plan, or so he believed. He had shed his supposedly sick wife, secured his future with a compliant subordinate, and shielded his impending wealth inside a shadow holding company. The lead buyer smiled, sliding the final signature page across the smooth oak surface. Bradley reached into the breast pocket of his tailored Italian suit. He withdrew his favorite writing instrument. It was a custom-engraved silver-plated fountain pen with a specialized iridium nib. He possessed an intense attachment to that specific pen, claiming it brought him luck in high-stakes business dealings. It was the exact same pen he held in his hand 3 years ago, when he sat alone in his office, carefully tracing the cursive loops of my name onto the Castillo Ranch deed. He had used that beautiful instrument to commit federal bank fraud to secure his initial seed capital. He unscrewed the cap and positioned the nib a fraction of an inch above the signature line. Before the black ink could bleed into the pristine paper, the heavy double doors of the conference room swung open. The interruption lacked any polite knock or hesitant entry. The doors parted with a swift, undeniable force that demanded immediate attention. Mitchell Vargas walked into the room. He did not look like a man arriving for a celebration. He wore a sharp, charcoal suit and an expression of predatory calm. Flanking him on either side were the senior partners of the very law firm hosting the meeting, the elite legal counsel representing the buyers. The senior partners looked pale, sweating, and visibly panicked, their usual corporate composure entirely shattered. Bradley froze, the silver pen hovering in midair. The confident smile on his face faltered, replaced by a flicker of severe irritation. He did not recognize Mitchell Vargas, but he recognized the sudden, drastic shift in the atmospheric pressure. The celebratory mood evaporated, replaced by a suffocating heavy tension that settled over the oak table. Bradley Lawson, Mitchell, announced his gravelly baritone, slicing through the quiet room. Mitchell did not wait for an invitation to speak. He stepped right up to the edge of the table and dropped 3 heavy leather-bound legal binders onto the surface. The impact produced a loud, echoing thud that rattled the crystal champagne flutes and sent a shiver through the room. "Who are you?" Bradley demanded, his voice tightening with a mixture of anger and rising uncertainty. "We are in the middle of a closed transaction. You need to leave." "I am the legal counsel representing your wife, Sydney Castillo," Mitchell replied smoothly, maintaining unblinking eye contact. "And you are no longer in the middle of a transaction. You are the primary subject of a federal fraud investigation." The lead venture capitalist frowned, glancing rapidly between Bradley and the imposing litigator standing at the edge of the table. "What is the meaning of this?" Mitchell turned his attention to the buyer. He spoke with the clinical precision of a surgeon operating on a fatal wound. "My firm has formally notified your legal department that the startup you are attempting to acquire is secured by fraudulent collateral. The foundational seed loans anchoring the company are backed by a forged deed to a 500-acre property in the Texas Hill Country. A profound silence descended upon the glass-walled room. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning vents overhead and the distant muffled wail of a police siren from the city streets far below. Bradley lost all the color in his face. His skin turned a sickly ashen gray. The hand holding the fountain pen began to tremble, a fine, uncontrollable vibration that he could not suppress. "That is an absurd accusation," Bradley stammered, though his voice lacked any real conviction. He looked at Lauren, whose own expression had morphed into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. She shrank back in her leather chair, putting distance between herself and the man she realized was sinking rapidly. Bradley looked back at the buyers, attempting a desperate pivot to salvage the illusion. "She is bitter about the divorce we initiated this morning. She is trying to sabotage my business out of spite. Do not listen to him." Mitchell did not raise his voice. He merely tapped the top binder with his index finger. "The Castillo Ranch deed is currently under an active lis pendens for forgery. The notice of fraudulent inducement was served to your attorneys 10 minutes ago. If you proceed with this acquisition, you are knowingly purchasing a company funded by felony bank fraud. You will absorb the liability, and the federal government will freeze the assets the moment this ink dries. Venture capitalists thrive on calculated risk, but they run from federal criminal exposure. They do not tolerate structural deception." The lead buyer did not ask for further clarification. He did not offer Bradley a chance to explain, deflect, or defend himself. The buyer simply reached across the table, grabbed the thick stack of acquisition contracts, and yanked them out of Bradley's reach. "The deal is dead," the buyer stated, his tone sharp and unforgiving. "We are withdrawing our offer immediately. We will also be pursuing civil damages for the time and capital wasted during this due diligence period." The buyers stood up in unison, buttoning their suit jackets with swift, angry motions. They walked out of the conference room without offering a single backward glance, leaving the crystal flutes untouched and the room devoid of its former glory. In the span of 60 seconds, the fortune Bradley had sacrificed his marriage to obtain vanished into the sterile corporate air. The shadow holding company, the grand legacy, the luxurious future he promised his pregnant marketing director, all of it disintegrated right before his eyes. Bradley remained frozen in his leather chair, paralyzed by the sheer velocity of his ruin. His chest heaved, struggling to draw oxygen into his tightening lungs. The customized silver pen was still clutched in his trembling fingers, hovering uselessly over the empty space where the contract had rested mere moments ago. Lauren slowly pushed her chair away from the table. She looked at Bradley, not with sympathy or partnership, but with the cold, calculating gaze of a survivor evaluating a sinking ship. The man she thought would elevate her to the ranks of the ultra-wealthy was now a toxic liability facing federal prison time. Mitchell Vargas stood on the opposite side of the oak table, observing the wreckage with a satisfied, shark-like smile. He leaned forward, bracing his hands on the polished wood, and closed the distance between them. He reached out and plucked the silver fountain pen right out of Bradley's shaking hand. Bradley did not resist. He was in a state of profound shock, staring at the empty space, unable to process the destruction of his reality. "You forged my client's signature to steal her heritage," Mitchell said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper meant only for Bradley. "You thought you were the smartest person in the room. You thought she was just a compliant stepping stone you could discard when you reached the top. You were incorrect." Mitchell slipped the silver pen into the interior pocket of his charcoal suit jacket. "I will be taking this as evidence," Mitchell concluded. "Expect the federal process servers to arrive at your residence by tomorrow morning. Have a pleasant afternoon." Mitchell turned and walked out of the glass-walled room, the heavy oak doors swinging shut behind him. Bradley was left sitting in the echoing silence of his own destruction. The illusion he spent years building had shattered in a single minute. He had no company left to sell. He had no fortune to hide. He was surrounded by the debris of his profound arrogance. The panic began to set in, a cold, suffocating tide rising in his throat. He needed an escape route. He needed someone to blame, someone to manipulate, someone to stop the avalanche. He reached for his smartphone, desperate to dial the one person he thought he could still control. He did not know the woman waiting on the other end of the line was sitting on a Texas ranch, drinking iced tea, holding the final biological weapon that would sever his last remaining tether to reality. The drive from the Houston Medical Center to the Texas Hill Country required exactly 3 hours of highway navigation. I spent the journey watching the suffocating concrete overpasses gradually give way to sprawling fields of dry golden grass and scattered cedar oaks. By the time I guided my sedan onto the long gravel driveway of the Castillo Ranch, the residual adrenaline that fueled my morning had settled into a deep, satisfying tranquility. I parked my vehicle near the wraparound porch, stepped out into the sweltering afternoon heat, and walked up the wooden steps. My grandfather had built this structure by hand over 50 years ago. He was a resilient man who weathered severe droughts, cattle market crashes, and economic depressions with unwavering, quiet dignity. I channeled his stoic endurance now. I walked into the farmhouse kitchen, poured myself a tall crystal glass of unsweetened iced tea, and returned outside to sit in the shade of the overhanging roof. I arranged myself in a woven wicker chair. I listened to the rhythmic buzzing hum of the cicadas hidden within the ancient oak trees. The stark contrast between my serene, isolated environment and the corporate bloodbath currently unfolding in downtown Houston brought a faint smile to my lips. As a logistics director, my entire career involved managing systemic chaos and mitigating catastrophic failures. Today, I was simply sitting back and allowing a failure of epic proportions to run its natural destructive course. The digital clock on my smartphone shifted to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. At that precise minute, the device began to vibrate harshly against the wooden porch railing. The screen illuminated, displaying Bradley's name in stark white letters. The arrogant tech founder who had handed me divorce papers with a practiced, sympathetic frown just a few hours earlier was now reduced to a frantic incoming call. I let the phone ring 3 times. I wanted him to wait. I wanted the silence on the line to stretch his fraying nerves until they snapped. On the 4th ring, I swiped the glass screen and brought the speaker to my ear. I did not offer a polite greeting. "Sydney," he gasped. His voice cracked on the 2nd syllable. It was high, breathless, and entirely stripped of the polished corporate veneer he usually wore like a protective suit of armor. The commanding boardroom tone was gone, replaced by the panicked squeak of a cornered animal. "What did you do?" he demanded, the words tumbling out of his mouth in a frantic, disjointed rush. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my iced tea. The cold liquid slid down my throat, providing a sharp, refreshing contrast to the blistering Texas air. "I am sitting on my porch, Bradley," I replied, my tone even and unbothered. "I am enjoying a beautiful afternoon. What are you doing?" They pulled the deal, he practically screamed into the receiver. The buyers walked out of the conference room. Mitchell Vargas brought the venture capitalist's own legal counsel into the meeting. They know about the collateral. They are talking about contacting the federal authorities. They said the word FBI. "Sydney, why would you do this? You froze the entire acquisition. My investors are threatening to sue me for breach of fiduciary duty." His panic was a tangible, heavy thing radiating through the cellular connection. The man who had meticulously planned to drain my bank accounts, shelter his impending wealth in a shadow holding company, and steal my heritage was now drowning in the immediate consequences of his own hubris. I merely protected my assets, I stated, keeping my volume low and steady. Did you honestly believe I would never review the founding financial documents for your startup? Did you think you could forge my signature on the deed to my grandfather's property and I would just quietly fade away into the background? There was a sharp, jagged intake of breath on the other end of the line. The reality of the situation finally penetrated the thick fog of his panic. He realized the oblivious, sick wife he discarded in the hospital parking lot was a carefully constructed illusion. He realized I had known about the financial theft, the secret limited liability company, and the prolonged betrayal long before he ever handed me that manila envelope. But instead of apologizing, instead of taking accountability for the federal crimes he committed, Bradley retreated to his most familiar and toxic weapon. He pivoted to emotional manipulation. He attempted to rewrite the narrative to make me the villain of his story. "Sydney, please," he begged, his voice dropping into a sickeningly sweet register, attempting to elicit my inherent empathy. "You have to call your lawyer off. You have to drop the injunction and clear the property title. If this deal dies, the company goes bankrupt immediately. I will lose everything I have worked for over the past 5 years. I will go to federal prison." I rested the condensation-covered glass against my knee. "You made those choices, Bradley. You signed my name on those bank documents." "I did it for us," he lied, the desperation making him reckless and sloppy. "I was going to secure our future. I was trying to build a foundation. But things changed between us. You have to understand my current position. Lauren is pregnant." The sheer audacity of the statement hung in the humid, heavy air. He was utilizing his mistress and her unborn child as a human shield to deflect the consequences of his felony fraud. He expected me to prioritize the financial security of his new secret family over my own generational wealth. He wanted me to fall on my sword so his betrayal could thrive. "I have a family to think about now," he pleaded, his voice breaking with manufactured sorrow. "A real family. You cannot destroy an innocent child's future just because you are angry about the divorce. Please, Sydney, I am begging you, drop the lawsuit." I closed my eyes and listened to the wind rustling the dry leaves of the cedar trees. The anger that had burned inside my chest for the past 2 weeks extinguished itself. It was replaced by a cold, clinical fascination. I was studying a parasite desperately clinging to a host that had already severed the connection. Lauren had played him brilliantly. She had recognized his desperate obsession with building a legacy and exploited it with ruthless efficiency. She was using him as a financial stepping stone, and he was too blind to see the strings attached to his own limbs. I opened my eyes and looked out over the vast, sun-baked expanse of the hill country. "That is the most interesting part of this entire ordeal, Bradley," I said softly, leaning back into the wicker chair. "What do you mean?" he asked, his breathing jagged and uneven through the phone speaker. "I attended my neurology appointment this morning." I explained, my words measured and deliberate, ensuring he heard every single syllable. The doctor informed me that my mysterious illness is nothing more than a simple vitamin deficiency. I am going to live a very long, very healthy life. But while I was sitting in that clinic, I requested a favor. I asked the staff to pull the historical records from the Austin Fertility Institute, the files you refused to read 4 years ago because you were too busy pitching angel investors. The line went dead quiet. The frantic breathing stopped. The silence was heavier than any words he could have spoken. "I reviewed your genetic sequencing today," I continued. The doctor was very thorough in his explanation. "You have a severe structural abnormality on your Y chromosome. You produce 0 viable cells. You are irreversibly sterile, and you have been since the day you were born. I let the biological truth settle over him. I could almost hear the gears grinding to a halt in his mind as the implications of my statement collided with the reality he thought he knew. The fortune he lost was devastating, but the legacy he thought he gained was a phantom. You might want to turn around and ask Lauren exactly who the father of her child is, I advised, my voice dropping to a harsh, cutting whisper. Because biologically, it is physically impossible for that baby to be yours. I did not wait for a response. I did not want to hear the sound of his world fracturing into a million unrecoverable pieces. I moved my thumb across the screen and ended the call, leaving him standing in the wreckage of his own design. I set the smartphone face down on the wicker table. The screen went dark, severing the connection and plunging my porch back into the soothing, rhythmic symphony of the hill country cicadas. The ice cubes in my glass shifted, clinking softly against the crystal. I leaned back in my chair, allowing the warm, cedar-scented breeze to wash over my face. For the first time in 5 years, the phantom weight of inadequacy lifted from my shoulders. The narrative Bradley had meticulously crafted to justify his betrayal was incinerated. He was left holding the ashes. I did not personally witness the immediate fallout of that phone call. I did not need to be physically present in downtown Houston to watch his reality fracture. When you hire a professional like Mitchell Vargas, you do not just get a corporate litigator. You gain an entire tactical network. Anticipating a volatile reaction after the boardroom ambush, Mitchell had retained a private investigator to discreetly monitor the opposing party. The operative was stationed in the ground floor atrium of the legal high-rise, blending seamlessly into the crowd of rushing executives and caffeinated paralegals. Through the detailed dossier provided to me the following day, supplemented by high-resolution surveillance photographs, I experienced the confrontation as if I were standing mere feet away. The elevator doors chimed and parted on the ground floor. Bradley stumbled out into the cavernous marble-lined lobby. He looks like a man who had just survived a high-speed collision. His silk tie was yanked loose, hanging askew against his unbuttoned collar. The tailored suit jacket he wore like armor just a few hours prior now hung limply from his slumping shoulders. His face was a canvas of shock, the skin pale, encoded in a sheen of cold perspiration. Lauren trailed a few paces behind him. The supportive, radiant partner facade she wore upstairs during the acquisition meeting had vanished. She clutched her designer handbag tightly against her ribs, her posture rigid and defensive. She was a woman calculating her exit velocity. The moment Mitchell Vargas dropped the federal fraud binders on the conference table, she recognized the sinking ship. She wanted to slip through the revolving glass doors and disappear into the crowded city streets before the shrapnel of his impending indictment could graze her pristine reputation. Bradley did not let her escape. He stopped abruptly in the center of the echoing atrium, forcing her to halt to avoid colliding with his back. He pivoted on his heel. His pale blue eyes, usually brimming with arrogant confidence, were wide and frantic. He stared at her stomach, then shifted his gaze up to her face, searching for a trace of the devotion she had promised him. "Tell me the truth!" Bradley demanded. His voice echoed off the polished stone walls, drawing the curious stares of passing pedestrians. The investigator noted the tremor in his hands as he gestured toward her. Lauren took a step backward, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. "Keep your voice down," she hissed, glancing nervously at the security guards stationed near the reception desk. "You are making a scene. We need to leave this building before the authorities arrive." My wife just called me Bradley, pressed, ignoring her plea. His tone grew jagged, fueled by a potent mixture of dread and rising fury. "She went to the doctor today. She pulled my historical medical records from the fertility clinic. She told me I have a structural chromosomal defect. She told me I am sterile. Lauren froze. The color drained from her cheeks not out of sympathy, but out of the sudden realization that her primary leverage had just been neutralized. She opened her mouth to speak, perhaps to deploy a final lie, but the words died in her throat. "Look me in the eye and tell me my wife is lying," Bradley challenged, stepping closer. "Tell me that baby belongs to me. Prove it. We will go to a private clinic right now. We will demand a prenatal DNA test today. If you are telling the truth, you have nothing to fear." The silence that followed was profound. The private investigator captured a photograph of Lauren at that exact second. Her expression was devoid of any affection. The mask slipped entirely, revealing a predator staring down a wounded target. She did not weep. She did not deny the accusation. She merely let out a short, cynical scoff. "You are incredibly naive, Bradley," Lauren said, her voice dropping to a harsh, whispering cadence. "Did you really think a woman like me would tether her future to a man who steals from his own family to fund his vanity projects?" The admission struck him like a physical blow. He staggered back a half step, the breath rushing out of his lungs. "Who?" he choked out, his voice barely a whisper. Lauren adjusted the strap of her handbag, her demeanor shifting into chilling transactional efficiency. "Do you remember Marcus?" she asked, referring to a junior software developer at the startup, a quiet, unassuming employee Bradley routinely belittled and passed over for promotions. "We have been together for nearly a year. He is brilliant, but he lacks capital. You, on the other hand, had capital, even if it was fraudulent." Bradley stared at her, the gears in his mind grinding against the horrifying revelation. "You knew about the forged deed," he breathed, the realization dawning on him. "Of course I knew, Lauren," countered a cruel smile touching the corners of her mouth. "You leave your laptop unsecured on your desk every time you fetch a coffee. You are sloppy. When I saw the collateral agreements, I realized your company was a ticking time bomb. I knew it was only a matter of time before the authorities or your wife caught up with you." But she did not just walk away with the knowledge of his crime. She weaponized it. "I could not just leave empty-handed," Lauren explained, her tone conversational, as if she were discussing quarterly marketing metrics instead of corporate sabotage. "While you were busy dreaming about your $40 million buyout and this fake legacy, Marcus and I were busy restructuring the startup's operational accounts. We have been systematically siphoning funds for the past 6 months, routing the capital through offshore vendor payments and untraceable cryptocurrency exchanges. You were so focused on hiding your money from your wife, you never bothered to monitor the internal ledgers." The investigator described Bradley as looking hollowed out, a man watching his entire universe collapse in real time. Lauren had not just cheated on him, she had grifted the grifter. She used his desperate obsession with fathering an heir to blind him, keeping him distracted with sonogram pictures and romantic getaways while she and her lover methodically emptied his accounts to construct their own golden parachute. "You used me," Bradley whispered, the gravity of his isolation pulling him down. "You used your wife," Lauren retorted, her eyes flashing with cold contempt. "Do not stand there and pretend you have a moral high ground. You are a fraud, Bradley. You always have been. Now you are a broke fraud facing a federal indictment." Lauren turned her back on him and walked through the revolving glass doors, stepping out into the blinding Houston sunlight. She disappeared into the rushing crowd, taking his stolen funds, his fabricated legacy, and his last shred of dignity with her. The private investigator reported that Bradley remained standing in the center of the lobby for nearly 20 minutes. He did not move. He did not check his phone. He simply stared at the empty space where his future used to be. He had thrown away a loyal marriage, destroyed his professional reputation, and committed a federal offense for a woman who despised him. He was entirely isolated. He possessed no money, no functioning company, no child, and no devoted partner to cushion the fall. He was a king standing in the ruins of a castle he built on quicksand. Reading that dossier the next day brought a deep, profound sense of closure. But my current afternoon on the porch was far from over. The corporate bloodbath was finished, yet the domestic fallout was just beginning to ripple outward. I finished my iced tea, the crystal glass sweating in the humid air. I considered going inside to prepare dinner, content to let the silence of the ranch wash over me for the remainder of the evening. Then, the rhythmic crunch of tires on gravel broke the stillness. I looked down the long, winding driveway. A silver luxury sedan was speeding toward the farmhouse, kicking up a dense cloud of white dust in its wake. I recognized the vehicle immediately. It was Patricia. The mother who had raided my filing cabinet in search of life insurance policies was arriving unannounced for a second time. However, judging by the reckless speed of her approach, she was not bringing soup. The son had undoubtedly called his mother in a state of sheer panic, triggering the next phase of the conflict. I remained seated in my wicker chair, folding my hands in my lap, ready to face the desperate enabler, who was about to discover that the sick, fragile daughter-in-law she tried to bury was actually the architect of her family's total destruction. The silver luxury sedan did not merely drive onto my property. It careened down the long gravel driveway, kicking up a blinding, chaotic cloud of white limestone dust. The vehicle skidded to a sudden halt mere inches from the heavy wrought iron gate that separated the main farmhouse yard from the outer pastures. The engine cut off. The driver's side door flew open with frantic urgency. Patricia emerged from the cloud of settling dust. The woman standing before me bore zero resemblance to the immaculate, calculating socialite who had invaded my home just days prior. The weaponized Southern hospitality was entirely gone. Her signature string of pearls was missing. Her tailored linen blouse was wrinkled and stained with perspiration. Her usually flawless blonde hair hung in disheveled strands around her face, framing eyes that were swollen and red. She gripped the iron bars of the gate, her knuckles turning bone white. She did not bother attempting a polite greeting. She did not offer a forced, radiant smile or a shallow compliment about the sprawling hill country landscape. The facade had burned to the ground, leaving only the desperate, haggard reality of a mother watching her son's empire collapse into a federal crime scene. "Sydney," she gasped, her voice raw and hoarse. "Please." I remained seated on the porch for a long moment, the crystal glass of iced tea resting cool against my palm. I observed her panic with clinical detachment. For 5 years, this woman had subjected me to 1,000 tiny indignities. She had hosted extravagant holiday dinners where she subtly criticized my demanding career, implying my professional ambitions were the reason her son lacked an heir. She had cultivated Bradley's towering entitlement, teaching him that the world existed solely to serve his desires. She had smiled in my face while actively participating in a conspiracy to strip me of my generational wealth. I set the glass down on the wicker table. I stood up, smoothing the fabric of my linen trousers, and walked slowly down the wooden porch steps. I crossed the sun-baked lawn, my footsteps silent against the dry grass, until I stood just a few feet away from the iron gate. I did not unlock the latch. I kept the heavy metal barrier firmly between us. He called me Patricia, wept, the tears carving jagged tracks through her foundation. He is terrified. The buyers withdrew their offer. The bank is freezing his operational accounts. The lawyers are talking about criminal indictments. Sydney, you have to stop this. He will go to jail. I looked at her trembling hands clutching the iron bars. He committed felony wire fraud, Patricia, I replied, my voice a calm, steady counterpoint to her hysteria. He forged my signature on federal lending documents to steal my grandfather's land. The legal system tends to frown upon that particular business strategy. He made a mistake, she pleaded, her voice rising to a shrill, desperate pitch. He was under so much pressure. The startup was failing and he needed capital. He thought he could pay it back before you ever found out. He never intended to hurt you. I tilted my head, studying the frantic arithmetic happening behind her tear-filled eyes. She was attempting to rewrite history right in front of me. She wanted to frame his methodical, years-long deception as a momentary lapse in judgment. She was intentionally ignoring the shadow holding company the drained marital savings and the pregnant mistress currently fleeing with his stolen funds. We will lose everything, Patricia sobbed, sinking slightly, her knees buckling under the weight of her impending social and financial ruin. The scandal will destroy our family name. The legal fees alone will bankrupt us. Please, Sydney, I am begging you. Family forgives. You have always been the reasonable one. You have a good heart. Do not let them take my son away. The invocation of my supposed good heart hung in the humid air, heavy and toxic. It was the ultimate manipulation tactic. Toxic people routinely rely on the empathy of their victims to shield themselves from accountability. They weaponize forgiveness, demanding grace while offering zero repentance. She wanted me to absorb the damage of his crimes so she could preserve her comfortable country club existence. I reached into the pocket of my trousers and extracted my smartphone. You came into my house 2 days ago claiming you wanted to cook me chicken soup, I said, keeping my gaze locked on her face. You told me you were worried about my failing health. You told me you just wanted to make sure my affairs were in order to alleviate my stress. Patricia flinched, recognizing the shift in my tone. The desperate weeping slowed, replaced by a sudden, wary apprehension. When you retreated from my office, I continued tapping the screen of my device to open an encrypted application. I realized I needed to verify exactly what you had been doing before I interrupted you. As a logistics director, I frequently handle highly sensitive corporate data. When I transitioned to working from home, I installed a small motion-activated security camera on the top shelf of my bookcase. It is a discrete device designed to monitor the filing cabinets. The remaining color drained from Patricia's face. Her breath caught in her throat. She released her grip on the iron bars, taking a slow, unsteady step backward onto the gravel. I did not just watch you dig through my drawers, I explained, the cold authority returning to my voice. I listened to you. I pressed the play icon on the digital audio file. The volume on my phone was turned to the maximum setting. The recording cut through the quiet rural silence, crisp and undeniable. The audio captured the distinct metallic scrape of the filing cabinet drawer sliding open. Then the sound of rustling paper filled the air. A few seconds later, Patricia's own voice echoed from the small speaker, sharp, calculating, and entirely devoid of maternal warmth. Just checking the death benefit on this policy. $500,000. And the ranch deed is clear. If she declines much faster, Bradley inherits it all. Before the acquisition even closes, I paused the recording. The silence that followed was suffocating. Patricia stood frozen on the driveway. Her jaw hung open, her lips trembling, but no sound emerged. The undeniable proof of her predatory malice had just been played back to her under the bright Texas sun. The sweet, caring mother-in-law persona was dead, incinerated by her own spoken words. She realized, I knew everything. I knew she had actively rooted for my demise, calculating the financial windfall my death would provide her son. I looked at the woman who had rifled through my office, hoping I was terminally ill so she could harvest my assets. "I have a good heart, Patricia," I said softly. I reached out and grasped the heavy iron latch of the gate. I pushed the metal bar securely into the locking mechanism. The metallic clang rang out, a final definitive barrier closing between my sanctuary and her toxicity. "But I have a better memory," I concluded, my eyes narrowing into a hard, unforgiving glare. "Never come to my property again." I turned my back on her. I did not wait to watch her climb back into her silver sedan. I did not care if she stood crying on the gravel for another hour. I walked up the wooden steps, crossed the shaded porch, and entered the farmhouse, locking the heavy oak door behind me. The defensive line was held. The family enablers were banished. However, the war was not entirely finished. Bradley was cornered, isolated, and staring down the barrel of a federal indictment. But a narcissist facing total annihilation is a dangerous adversary. He had lost his company, his mistress, and his mother's ability to manipulate me. But the legal untangling of our marriage remained. The formal divorce mediation was scheduled to take place in 3 days. I knew Bradley would not walk into that conference room and surrender quietly. He would search for one final pressure point, one last dirty trick to leverage his survival. I spent the weekend preparing with Mitchell Vargas, anticipating the desperate, malicious strategy my soon-to-be ex-husband would attempt to deploy across the negotiation table. The 72 hours following Patricia's frantic departure from my property were characterized by a profound restorative silence. I spent the weekend walking the perimeter of the Castillo Ranch, breathing in the scent of sun-baked earth and cedar, grounding myself in the heritage I had successfully defended. The corporate sabotage was complete, and the biological truth had obliterated his secret life. But the legal severing of our marriage remained. The formal divorce mediation was scheduled for Monday morning. I knew the man I was about to face would not surrender quietly. A narcissist facing total annihilation is a cornered predator. He had lost his company, his mistress, and his hidden fortune. But he would inevitably search for one final pressure point to leverage his survival. I arrived at the downtown Houston offices of Vargas and Sterling promptly at 9 o'clock. The mediation did not take place in a neutral courthouse. Mitchell Vargas insisted on hosting the proceedings on his own territory, utilizing a severe, windowless interior conference room designed to evoke a sense of claustrophobia and inevitable defeat. The walls were paneled in dark mahogany, and the air conditioning hummed with a frigid, relentless intensity. I sat on one side of the massive granite table flanked by Mitchell. A retired county judge, acting as the neutral mediator, sat at the head of the table, organizing a stack of preliminary documents. At exactly 5 minutes past the hour, the heavy wooden doors swung inward. Bradley entered the room, accompanied by a frantic, overworked defense attorney, clutching a battered leather briefcase. The physical deterioration Bradley had undergone in a mere 3 days was astonishing. He looked 10 years older. The arrogant, polished tech founder who had confidently handed me divorce papers in a hospital parking lot was entirely gone. The man who pulled out the chair across from me was a hollowed-out shell. His expensive Italian suit hung loosely on his frame, the fabric wrinkled and sagging. His skin possessed a sickly grayish pallor, and his eyes were deeply bloodshot, rimmed with severe purple shadows that betrayed countless sleepless nights. He exuded a toxic, palpable mixture of exhaustion, terror, and lingering desperate malice. He refused to meet my gaze. He stared fixedly at the granite tabletop, his jaw clenching and unclenching in a rhythmic, agitated spasm. The retired judge initiated the proceedings, outlining the purpose of our gathering in a dry, monotonous cadence. We were present to dissolve the marital union, divide the remaining assets, and establish a final settlement. Given the spectacular implosion of Apex Innovations Group and the subsequent freezing of his operational accounts, the marital estate was significantly less complicated than it had been a week prior. Bradley's defense attorney cleared his throat, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. He launched into an opening statement that was equal parts defensive posturing and transparent desperation. He acknowledged the failure of the corporate acquisition, carefully avoiding any mention of the pending federal fraud investigation. Then, he initiated their offensive strategy. Bradley was facing a mountain of impending legal debt. Securing representation for federal white-collar criminal defense requires massive upfront financial retainers. He was entirely broke. His stolen funds siphoned away by his fleeing mistress, he needed capital, and he believed he had found one final avenue to extort it from me. His attorney directed his attention to Mitchell Vargas. My client acknowledges that the startup equity is currently contested, the lawyer stated, his voice wavering slightly under Mitchell's predatory stare. However, this is a community property state. We are evaluating the entirety of the marital estate, including the substantial life insurance policy maintained by Mrs. Lawson through her corporate employer. The lawyer steepled his fingers, attempting to project authority. The policy carries a significant cash value and a massive death benefit. My client is demanding an immediate lump sum payout equivalent to 50% of that policy's valuation to be distributed as spousal support. If this demand is not met today, we are prepared to reject mediation. We will drag this divorce through the traditional court system. We will file endless discovery motions, request countless depositions, and tie up the Castillo Ranch in probate litigation for the next half-decade. Bradley finally lifted his head, locking his bloodshot eyes on mine. The malice radiating from his stare was venomous. He was attempting to weaponize time and exhaustion. He wanted to bleed me dry through legal fees and prolonged anxiety, forcing me into submission. I remained perfectly still, my expression an impenetrable mask of calm. I recalled Patricia rifling through my filing cabinet, her manicured hands trembling as she read the declaration page of that exact insurance policy. The mother and son had coordinated this backup plan. If the acquisition fell through, they intended to hold my future hostage, demanding a ransom funded by my own hard-earned benefits. Mitchell Vargas did not shout. He did not object or slam his hands on the table. Instead, he did something incredibly rare for a high-stakes corporate litigator. He laughed. It was not a booming, jovial sound. It was a sharp, brief chuckle that cut through the tense atmosphere of the conference room like a surgical scalpel. He slowly opened his leather folio, shaking his head in mild amusement. "You are threatening us with a protracted legal battle over an asset you cannot touch," Mitchell said, his gravelly voice echoing off the mahogany walls. Mitchell extracted a single stapled document from his folder. He did not hand it to Bradley's attorney. He slid it across the smooth granite surface, stopping it perfectly in front of the retired judge. Counselor Mitchell continued addressing the opposing lawyer. "Your client is operating on outdated intelligence. Weeks ago, immediately after my client discovered certain anomalies regarding a shadow holding company, we executed a preemptive legal maneuver." The judge adjusted his reading glasses, scanning the first page of the document. Mrs. Lawson transferred the total ownership of that life insurance policy, along with several other key financial instruments, into an airtight, irrevocable trust, Mitchell explained, leaning forward to dominate the physical space of the room. She legally relinquished direct ownership, placing those assets behind an impenetrable legal fortress. She is the grantor, but she is no longer the owner. The policy is entirely shielded from marital property division. Your client has absolutely zero claim to it, and no family court judge in this state possesses the jurisdiction to break that trust. The mediator reviewed the notary seals and the filing dates, nodding in confirmation. The document is binding and properly executed, the judge stated softly, sliding the paperwork toward Bradley's defense attorney. Bradley stared at the stapled pages. The final fragment of leverage he thought he possessed turned to ash right in front of him. His chest heaved, a ragged, desperate breath escaping his lips. He had nothing left to negotiate with. Mitchell Vargas did not allow the opposition time to recover. He immediately launched the final devastating countermeasure. "Now that we have dispensed with your extortion attempt," Mitchell said, his tone dropping into a cold, unforgiving register, "let us discuss reality. Your client is facing imminent federal indictment for felony wire fraud and bank fraud. He forged my client's signature on lending documents to secure capital." Bradley's attorney attempted to interrupt, raising a hand. "We are not here to discuss unproven criminal allegations." "You are going to listen very closely," Mitchell snapped, silencing the lawyer instantly. While spousal privilege often prevents a wife from testifying against a husband in a criminal proceeding, there are strict, undeniable exceptions when the crime is committed directly against the spouse. My client is the primary victim of his forgery. She can, and absolutely will, take the witness stand in a federal courtroom as a hostile witness. Her testimony will guarantee his conviction and ensure a maximum prison sentence. Bradley shrank back into his leather chair, the fight completely draining out of his posture. The threat of my testimony was the ultimate weapon. However, Mitchell offered his voice, dripping with calculated transactional mercy. "We propose a simple, non-negotiable exchange." Mitchell produced a thick stack of settlement documents, placing them directly in front of Bradley. "You will surrender 100% of your remaining equity in Apex Innovations Group, whatever worthless ashes remain of it. More importantly, you will immediately sign these release documents, officially clearing the fraudulent encumbrance on the Castillo Ranch. You will absorb the entire financial liability of the forged bank loan yourself. You will walk away from this marriage with nothing but the clothing currently on your back." Mitchell paused, letting the severity of the terms settle over the table. "In return for your total surrender, my client will decline to voluntarily testify in the impending federal criminal probe. The prosecutors will still pursue you based on the documentary evidence, but you will not have to face her on the witness stand. That is the only concession you will receive today. Sign the papers, or we walk out that door and call the United States Attorney's Office." Bradley stared at the paperwork. He looked at his defense attorney, his eyes silently pleading for a miracle, a loophole, a hidden objection that could save him. His lawyer simply looked down at the granite table and slowly shook his head, advising him to take the deal. He was completely, entirely cornered. The methodical, invisible trap I had spent weeks building had snapped shut with flawless precision. There was no escape route, no manipulation tactic left to deploy, and no mother or mistress coming to rescue him. Bradley reached out with a violently trembling hand. He picked up a standard, cheap plastic pen provided by the mediator, a stark and pathetic contrast to the custom silver fountain pen Mitchell had confiscated as evidence days prior. He pressed the ballpoint to the signature line. He did not read the dense legal paragraphs. He simply dragged the pen across the paper, his handwriting shaky and uncoordinated. He signed page after page, officially transferring his equity, clearing my ancestral property, and assuming the massive debt of his own crimes. He signed his own absolute ruin. When the final page was endorsed, he dropped the plastic pen. It clattered loudly against the stone table. He stood up, avoiding my gaze completely, and walked out of the conference room without uttering a single word. He was a broken man, stepping out into a future defined by federal prosecution and total isolation. The heavy wooden doors closed behind him, sealing his fate. I remained seated at the granite table, listening to the quiet rustle of paper as Mitchell Vargas organized our victory. A profound, overwhelming sense of liberation washed through my veins. The war was officially over. I had protected my legacy, neutralized the threats, and secured my independence. The arduous journey was finished, leaving only the quiet, restorative peace of a new morning on the ranch, waiting for my return. The seasons have shifted twice since that frigid mediation room in downtown Houston. I still live on the Castillo Ranch. Some mornings, the stifling, oppressive heat that defines this region gives way to a rare, clearing breeze sweeping down through the limestone canyons. I wake up long before dawn. I brew a pot of dark roast coffee, pour it into a heavy ceramic mug, and step out onto the expansive wooden porch. I sit in the same woven wicker chair where I once listened to a cornered man beg for his financial survival over a cellular connection. I watch the sun rise over the rolling hills, painting the endless Texas horizon in vivid shades of burnt orange and deep violet. I feel the rough texture of the floorboards beneath my bare feet. My grandfather drove every single nail into this deck. He sacrificed his youth and his physical comfort to secure a permanent sanctuary for his bloodline. I think about how incredibly close I came to losing his entire legacy, simply because I placed my faith in the person sleeping next to me. The legal machinery we set into motion that summer did not stop grinding when the divorce decree was signed. Surrendering his equity and clearing the encumbrance on my property saved Bradley Lawson from my hostile testimony, but it did not save him from the federal government. The United States Attorney's Office possesses a very low tolerance for wire fraud. The paper trail he left behind was pristine, undeniable, and deeply incriminating. 6 months after our marriage officially dissolved, Bradley stood in a federal courthouse. The tailored Italian suits he once wore like armor had been replaced by standard-issue institutional clothing. The sharp, arrogant lines of his jaw had softened into the hollow, sunken contours of a defeated man. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of bank fraud, hoping to secure leniency from a system that rarely shows mercy to white-collar criminals who attempt to manipulate federal lending institutions. The judge sentenced him to 36 months in a minimum security federal correctional institution located just outside of Beaumont. It is not a violent place, but it is a profoundly isolating one. His days of pitching angel investors, drinking vintage champagne in glass-walled boardrooms, and obsessing over his grand corporate trajectory are entirely gone. He spends his afternoons adhering to a rigid schedule dictated by wardens and correction officers. He is a number in a sprawling, unforgiving system. He divorced me because he claimed I was a sick woman who would only slow his ascent to the top of the world. He cast me aside to protect a legacy he thought he deserved, only to be ruined by his own biological reality and his toxic, boundless hubris. The supreme irony of his current existence is the isolation he constructed for himself. Lauren, the opportunistic marketing director who orchestrated the internal theft of his remaining operational funds, was never formally charged. She routed the stolen capital through a complex web of offshore vendor payments and decentralized cryptocurrency exchanges. By the time the forensic accountants untangled the digital knot she and her junior developer had vanished from the state. They took the money and the unborn child Bradley once proudly declared as his heir. He sits in a concrete cell, fully aware that the woman he destroyed his life to protect used him as a temporary financial stepping stone. He has no company left to sell. He has no hidden fortune waiting for his release. He has no child to carry his name. The collateral damage extended far beyond his prison sentence, rippling outward to decimate the toxic support system that enabled his deception. Patricia learned a very harsh lesson regarding the nature of Southern high society. In her affluent, gated suburban community, wealth offers a shield, but a public, federal indictment is a terminal social disease. The moment Bradley's criminal charges became public record, the invitations to charity galas and exclusive country club luncheons evaporated. The friends she once entertained with sweet tea and forced smiles suddenly stopped returning her calls. Her pristine reputation, the currency she valued above all else, turned to ash. She was forced to quietly list her sprawling estate on the market, downsizing to a modest condominium in a different zip code to escape the suffocating weight of the neighborhood gossip. She lives in profound silence now. She is a woman who spent her entire life judging the perceived shortcomings of others, only to end up exiled by the very social circle she fought so desperately to impress. Natalie, the sister who allowed her conscience to be overridden by family loyalty, sent me a single, lengthy email shortly after the sentencing. She attempted to apologize. She wrote paragraph after paragraph, detailing her own internal guilt, explaining how she felt trapped by her brother's ambition and her mother's relentless pressure. She wanted absolution. She wanted me to reply and grant her permission to stop feeling terrible about her complicity. I read the message once. Then I dragged it into the digital trash bin and emptied the folder. I did not reply. I owed them nothing. The Lawsons operated as a unified front when they believed they were stripping me of my assets, and they could experience the resulting devastation together. I refused to carry their emotional baggage a single step further. I did not rebuild my life around revenge. Vengeance is a chaotic, exhausting emotion that requires you to keep your focus locked on the people who hurt you. I chose to rebuild my life around clarity. I took the intense forensic focus I utilized in my corporate logistics career and applied it to my own personal foundation. I streamlined my existence. I invested the energy I used to spend absorbing Bradley's insecurities into maintaining the Castillo Ranch. I repaired the miles of wooden fencing. I restored the old barns. I watched the seasonal rains turn the arid soil a rich, vibrant green. I learned a fundamental truth during those agonizing weeks of discovery and tactical planning. You must never let someone else define your worth, and you must never accept a narrative that forces you to shoulder the blame for their hidden failures. For years, I allowed a man to convince me that my biology was defective, that I was the reason our family remained incomplete. I carried that heavy, suffocating guilt, while he lived a parallel life fueled by my financial stability. When the illusion finally cracked, I had a choice. I could have confronted him the moment I found the errant tax form. I could have screamed, thrown plates against the kitchen wall, and demanded immediate answers. I could have allowed my raw, unfiltered emotions to dictate my response. Instead, I chose silence. I chose strategy. I understood that warm tears might offer a temporary emotional release, but cold, undeniable facts are the only shield capable of stopping a predator. I gathered the data. I secured the evidence. I engaged a ruthless legal mechanism designed to neutralize the threat entirely. I built an invisible trap around him, allowing him to walk into the center of it with his head held high, blinded by his own towering arrogance. I let him sign his own ruin, using the very same silver pen he used to forge my name. The peace I feel today sitting on this wooden porch and watching the sunrise is not the result of luck. It is the direct result of choosing logic over panic. It is the reward for enduring the agonizing process of dismantling a lie piece by piece until nothing remains but the undisputed truth. I am 34 years old. I own 500 acres of prime Texas real estate outright. I possess a thriving corporate career, a clear conscience, and an immune system that is functioning perfectly. The man who tried to bury me is currently wearing a federal uniform, and the family that cheered him on is scattered and disgraced. I want you to think about the foundation of your own life. Think about the people you trust to hold your sensitive information, your assets, and your heart. If you ever find a pebble, a tiny inconsistency that makes your professional or personal instincts flare, do not ignore it. Do not allow anyone to convince you that your intuition is merely paranoia. Dig into the soil, review the ledgers, check the hidden digital files. If you were placed in my exact position, standing in the dark kitchen while the person you loved slept peacefully down the hall, discovering a betrayal so deep it threatened to erase your family legacy, what path would you choose? Would you have confronted him immediately, demanding the truth in a storm of righteous anger? Or would you have packed the evidence onto an encrypted drive, smiled over morning coffee, and built the trap in absolute silence? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Thank you for walking through this journey with me. And please remember to subscribe so you never miss another story of taking the power back. The story of Sydney Castillo and Bradley Lawson is a masterclass in the consequences of misplaced trust and the profound impact of familial betrayal. While the narrative is a gripping tale of corporate sabotage and legal maneuvering at its core, it is a stark reflection on parenting values, family responsibility, and the long-term guidance we provide to our children. As parents, we are tasked with not just raising children, but raising individuals who understand honesty, fairness, and the immense weight of their actions. Bradley's descent into federal fraud and isolation was not born in a vacuum. It was nurtured by a family dynamic that prioritized reputation over integrity and ambition over empathy. In traditional American family structures, there is a powerful emphasis on building a legacy, a narrative of success that often equates wealth and status with value. Bradley's obsession with this legacy blinded him to the genuine partnership he had with Sydney. He viewed her not as an equal, but as a stepping stone, a resource to be managed and ultimately discarded when she no longer served his immediate needs. This transactional view of relationships is a dangerous lesson to impart. It teaches children that people are disposable, that commitments are conditional, and that success is measured solely by accumulation rather than character. The role of Bradley's mother, Patricia, is particularly revealing. Her actions reflect a terrifying enablement, a willingness to overlook and even participate in deceit if it protects the family's perceived status. When parents shield their children from the consequences of their actions, when they justify unethical behavior under the guise of protecting them, they are failing in their most fundamental duty. They are raising adults who believe they are above the rules, immune to accountability, and entitled to whatever they desire regardless of the cost to others. Patricia's desperate plea that family forgives was a weaponization of love, an attempt to use empathy as a shield against justice. This brings us to the crucial importance of emotional awareness in raising children. Bradley's inability to process his own grief over their struggles with infertility led him to project the blame onto Sydney. He allowed her to carry the heavy, suffocating guilt of their empty nursery while he built a secret life. If we do not teach our children how to handle disappointment, failure, and grief, they will inevitably look for scapegoats. They will build elaborate lies to protect their fragile egos just as Bradley did. Emotional awareness is the foundation of honesty. It is the ability to face the uncomfortable truths about ourselves without resorting to deception. Sydney's journey, conversely, is a testament to the power of quiet resilience and absolute clarity. She did not react with the hysterics Bradley anticipated. She did not allow her emotions to dictate her strategy. Instead, she methodically gathered the truth until it was heavy enough to crush the lies. Her strength was not loud or explosive. It was rooted in a deep understanding of her own worth and a refusal to carry the blame that was never hers. This is the kind of strength we must model for our children. We must teach them that true power lies not in manipulation or volume, but in integrity, self-awareness, and the courage to face reality no matter how painful it may be. The contrast between Sydney and Lauren further illustrates the complexities of ambition and deceit. Lauren, like Bradley, was driven by a desire for a different life, but her methods were equally, if not more, manipulative. She exploited Bradley's vulnerabilities, grifting the grifter, and ultimately leaving him with nothing. It's a stark reminder that when we build our lives on falsehoods, we attract those who are equally willing to deceive. The foundation is rotten, and it will eventually collapse. As we navigate the complexities of raising children in a culture that often glorifies the hustle and the accumulation of wealth, we must actively prioritize fairness and honesty. We must teach our children that a legacy built on deceit is a fragile thing, easily shattered by the truth. We must instill in them the understanding that real success is measured by the quality of their relationships, the integrity of their actions, and their capacity for genuine empathy. The story of the Castillo Ranch is not just about a woman who outsmarted her treacherous husband. It is a cautionary tale about the devastating consequences of prioritizing ego over honesty and the enduring power of clarity. It forces us to examine our own lives, the values we are passing down, and the legacy we are truly building. Are we raising individuals who will stand firm in the face of truth, or are we enabling a culture of entitlement and deceit? If you found value in this reflection, and if you appreciate stories that challenge our understanding of justice and human nature, please consider subscribing to Emily Told Stories. We explore the intricate, often messy realities of relationships, betrayal, and the quiet power of reclaiming one's life. Ultimately, the greatest revenge isn't about making someone suffer. It's about refusing to carry their lies any longer. It's about building a life so rooted in clarity and truth that the deceit of others simply bounces off. Perhaps the most profound lesson we can offer our children is this: the only legacy worth leaving is one built on honesty. For a life constructed on falsehoods is merely a prison waiting for a warden. And sometimes, the most radical act of self-preservation is simply walking away from the noise and trusting the quiet strength of your own absolute truth.